3 gunmen, 12 hostages, one woman who'd never feared anything except failure, until now. Isabella Sterling had conquered Wall Street with ruthless precision, built empires with cold calculation, and crushed competitors without mercy. But when bullets shattered the windows of that Manhattan cafe, all her power meant nothing. The man she'd mocked as just a mechanic became her only hope for survival. This is the story of how the Ice Queen's empire crumbled, and how she found something worth more than all her wealth combined. Stay until the end, and comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels. The first snowfall of the season dusted Manhattan's streets with deceptive softness, coating the hard edges of the city in white lies. From her corner office on the 47th floor of the Meridian Capitol Tower, Isabella Sterling watched the flakes spiral past her window with the detached interest of someone observing a phenomenon that would never touch her. Weather was for people who walked, people who waited for buses, who felt the cold seep through inadequate coats, who tracked slush into cheap apartments. Isabella did none of these things. She turned from the window, her Louboutin heels clicking against imported Italian marble with the precise rhythm of a ticking clock. Her reflection caught in the floor-to-ceiling glass, 5'9" in heels, wrapped in a dove-gray suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, dark hair pulled back in a style that suggested control rather than beauty, though she possessed both in equal measure. At 34, she'd built Meridian Capital into a $7 billion empire through a combination of brilliant financial instinct and absolute ruthlessness. The business magazines called her the Ice Queen of Wall Street. They meant it as criticism. She wore it as a crown. "Your 10 o'clock is here," her assistant Marcus announced through the intercom, his voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone who'd learned not to inflect emotion around his employer. Isabella glanced at her Patek Philippe watch, a gift to herself after her first billion-dollar acquisition. 9:47 a.m., 13 minutes early. She made a mental note. Desperation, she thought, makes people punctual. "Give me 5 minutes, then send them to conference room A." "Him," Marcus corrected gently. "Just one person. Mr. Carter." Isabella's perfectly shaped eyebrow arched a millimeter. Sarah had been maddeningly vague about this investment opportunity, which was unlike her. Sarah Chen wasn't vague about anything. It was why their friendship had survived 15 years in a world where friendship was just another form of currency. Sarah had called it unconventional and potentially transformative, which in their world could mean anything from innovative fintech to a complete waste of time. The fact that it was a single person, not a team, suggested the latter. She spent the 5 minutes reviewing the morning's market reports, her mind processing data with computer-like efficiency. Tokyo up 1.3%, London flat, crude oil climbing, tech stocks showing volatility, all pieces of a puzzle she'd learned to solve faster than anyone else. Knowledge was power. Information was ammunition. And Isabella Sterling never entered any room unarmed. At precisely 9:52, she walked into conference room A. The man standing by the window wasn't what she expected. He was tall, 6'2", maybe 6'3", with the kind of build that suggested physical labor rather than personal training. Dark hair touched with early gray at the temples, strong jaw shadowed with stubble that was either artfully maintained or genuinely forgotten. He wore dark jeans, work boots that had actually seen work, and a button-down shirt under a canvas jacket that looked like it had history. No tie, no briefcase, no laptop. He was staring out at the Manhattan skyline with his hands in his pockets, and he didn't turn when she entered. First mistake, Isabella thought. Never give someone your back in a negotiation. "Mr. Carter?" Her voice could have frosted glass. "I'm Isabella Sterling." He turned slowly, and she found herself looking into eyes that were an unusual shade of gray-blue, like storm clouds over water. There was something in those eyes that made her uncomfortable, a steadiness, an assessment that felt uncomfortably like being seen rather than merely looked at. "Ethan." He extended his hand. "Thanks for taking the meeting." His handshake was firm but brief, calloused palms that confirmed the physical labor observation. Isabella's mind was already recalibrating. This wasn't an investor. This was someone Sarah had set her up with, socially. The realization landed like ice water down her spine. "Where's your presentation?" she asked, her tone sharpening. "Don't have one." Your pitch deck? Market analysis? Financial projections? None of those either. Isabella's smile could have cut diamonds. I see. Mr. Carter, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I don't know what Sarah told you about this meeting, but Meridian Capital doesn't make investments based on, she gestured vaguely at him, casual conversations. I'm not looking for an investment. His voice was quiet, but it carried weight. Not the weight of money or position, but something else. Something earned rather than inherited or purchased. And yeah, I figured out about 10 minutes ago that Sarah might have been creative about what she told both of us. Creative? Isabella's laugh was sharp. That's diplomatic. What exactly did she tell you? That a friend of hers wanted to grab coffee. Talk about getting a vintage motorcycle restored. He shrugged, and there was something almost apologetic in the gesture. I restore bikes, classic cars sometimes. It's what I do. You're a mechanic. The words came out flat, and Isabella didn't bother to hide her disdain. Not because there was anything wrong with being a mechanic, but because Sarah had wasted her time. Valuable time. Time that could have been spent on actual business, actual opportunities, actual anything other than standing in a conference room with a man who smelled faintly of motor oil and had calluses on his hands. Yeah. If her tone bothered him, he didn't show it. Been doing it about 5 years now. Got a shop in Red Hook. Small operation, just me and a part-timer, but we do good work. Isabella was already moving toward the door. Mr. Carter, Ethan, this has clearly been a waste of both our time. I'm sure your work is very adequate, but I don't own a motorcycle, vintage or otherwise, and I have actual meetings to attend. Marcus will show you out. Must get lonely up here. Isabella stopped, turned. Excuse me? Ethan was looking at her with that steady gaze again, and she realized with growing irritation that he hadn't moved from his spot by the window, hadn't been intimidated by her dismissal, hadn't scurried toward the door like most people did when she used that particular tone. The tower, he said, gesturing at the glass walls, the marble, the expensive art that Isabella had purchased because her decorator said it conveyed power. Must get lonely, all that space between you and everyone else. That's remarkably presumptuous from someone I met 90 seconds ago. Fair enough. He nodded, accepting the rebuke without flinching. Sarah talks about you sometimes. Says you're brilliant, driven, successful as hell. Also says you work 80-hour weeks, eat most meals at your desk, and haven't taken a vacation in 3 years. Sarah, Isabella said icily, talks too much. She cares about you, worries about you. Ethan finally moved, but not toward the door. He walked to the conference table, pulled out a chair, and sat down with the unselfconscious ease of someone who'd never learned to be intimidated by rooms designed to intimidate. Look, I get it. You're busy, important. I'm just a grease monkey who wandered into the wrong building. But since we're both here, and since Sarah went to this much trouble, maybe we could just grab that coffee? 30 minutes. No expectations, no agenda, just two people who apparently have a mutual friend with boundary issues. Isabella should have said no. Should have had Marcus escort him out. Should have called Sarah and delivered the kind of verbal evisceration that would make her friend think twice before playing matchmaker again. Instead, she found herself curious. It had been a long time since anyone had spoken to her the way this mechanic did, without deference, without calculation, without the careful weighing of words that characterized every other conversation in her life. It was either breathtaking honesty or spectacular stupidity, and she wanted to figure out which. 30 minutes, she said crisply. There's a cafe 3 blocks from here. Uncommon Grounds. Meet me there in 15 minutes, and do not be late. His smile was slight but genuine. Yes, ma'am. Don't call me ma'am. I'm not your commanding officer. Something flickered across his face. Too quick to identify, but it made her wonder. Then it was gone, replaced by that same calm steadiness. Noted, he said. See you in 15. Well, Uncommon Grounds was one of those carefully curated Manhattan establishments that worked hard to look effortless. Exposed brick, reclaimed wood tables, pendant lights made from Edison bulbs, and coffee that cost $8 for a cup that would be empty in 6 sips. Isabella came here because it was close, because the Wi-Fi was reliable, and because the baristas had learned never to attempt small talk with her. She arrived first, a small victory, and claimed a corner table that gave her a view of the door and the street beyond. Strategic positioning was reflexive for her. Always know your exits, always see who's coming, always maintain the advantage. Ethan walked in exactly 14 minutes after their conversation ended. Second small victory. He'd followed instructions. He'd also, she noticed with grudging approval, taken a moment to wash the visible grease from his hands and wipe down his boots. The canvas jacket remained, but it was clean. He'd made an effort, which was more than most people did. "What do you drink?" he asked, approaching her table. "I already ordered." "Right." He nodded and headed to the counter, returning a few minutes later with something that smelled like actual coffee, black, no fancy syrups or foam art. He sat across from her, took a sip, and waited. The silence stretched. Isabella was used to people filling silence, rushing to impress her, to pitch her, to prove their worth. Ethan just drank his coffee and looked mildly interested in everything and nothing in particular. "Fine." She'd start. "Tell me about yourself, Mr. Carter." "Ethan, and there's not much to tell. Grew up in Pennsylvania, small town you've never heard of. Joined the Army right out of high school, did some traveling courtesy of Uncle Sam, got out, moved to New York, started fixing things." He delivered this autobiography in the same tone someone might use to discuss the weather, factual, unadorned. "Some traveling," Isabella repeated, her analyst's mind catching the euphemism, which means deployments, combat zones. That's a safe assumption. "How many tours?" "Enough." She leaned back, studying him with the same intensity she'd used to evaluate a company's balance sheet. The way he sat, relaxed but aware, never quite having his back to the room. The economy of his movements. The way his eyes tracked the other patrons without appearing to do so. The scars she could now see on his hands, visible in the cafe's better lighting. "Special Forces," she said. It wasn't a question. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes confirmed it. "You're observant." "I'm paid to notice patterns, read people, predict behavior." She took a sip of her own coffee, some ridiculous seasonal blend Marcus had recommended. "You have the bearing. My ex-husband was ex-military. Different branch, different intensity, but I recognize the signs." "Ex-husband?" Ethan's tone was neutral, but she sensed the unasked question. "Married at 26, divorced at 28. He wanted someone who'd be home for dinner. I wanted someone who understood that empires aren't built on 9-to-5 schedules." She delivered this without emotion, a statement of fact. "It was amicable. We wanted different things." "What did you want?" The question was so direct, so stripped of artifice that Isabella actually paused. What did she want? Success? Obviously. Power, influence, security, the ability to never be vulnerable, never be dependent, never be the person waiting for someone else to save them. "To win," she said finally, "at everything." Ethan nodded slowly, as if this made perfect sense. "And do you? Win at everything?" "Yes." "Sounds exhausting." Isabella's smile was sharp. "Losing is more exhausting. Losing means someone else controls your fate. Losing means weakness, vulnerability, dependence. I don't do any of those things. Everyone's vulnerable sometimes. Not everyone chooses to be. Don't think it's a choice." Ethan's voice remained quiet, but there was certainty in it. Vulnerability just is, part of being human. You can pretend you're not, build walls, keep people at a distance, but it doesn't change the truth of it. Isabella felt her irritation rising. Is this the part where the blue-collar philosopher tells the shallow, rich woman about what really matters in life? Because I've seen that movie, and it's tedious. No. He didn't rise to the bait. This is the part where I wonder what happened that made you think being invulnerable was possible, let alone desirable. The words landed like a punch to the sternum, unexpected and precisely targeted. For a moment, Isabella saw herself at 9 years old, watching her father's company implode after a hostile takeover. Saw her mother's hands shaking as she sold jewelry to pay bills. Saw the house, the big house with the pool and the gardens, sold to strangers while she stood on the lawn with a single suitcase of belongings. She'd made a promise that day, never again, never vulnerable, never dependent, never weak. That she said coldly, is none of your business. You're right. I apologize. And he sounded like he meant it. Sarah was right about one thing, though. What's that? You're brilliant. Probably the smartest person in most rooms you walk into. He took another sip of coffee. But smart doesn't mean you're right. And success doesn't mean you're happy. Happiness, Isabella said the word like it tasted bitter, is a luxury people pursue when they have nothing real to accomplish. I have a company to run, investors to satisfy, employees depending on me. I don't have time for happiness. What about time for living? This is living, my life, my choices, my terms. Okay. Ethan checked his watch, a simple functional piece that probably cost less than Isabella's coffee. I should get going. I've got a '67 Mustang in the shop that won't rebuild itself. Isabella blinked. That's it? You're leaving? You said 30 minutes. We're at 28. He stood, pulling on his canvas jacket. Thanks for the coffee conversation. And seriously, no hard feelings about the setup. Sarah means well. Wait. The word escaped before Isabella could stop it. You're not going to argue? Try to convince me I'm wrong? Deliver some speech about how I should change my life? Ethan's smile was small and genuinely kind. Not my place. You're a grown woman who's built an impressive life. If it makes you happy, then I'm glad for you. If it doesn't, well, only you can decide what to do about that. He picked up his empty coffee cup. Take care of yourself, Isabella Sterling. He was halfway to the door when she called out, Why did you really come to this meeting? He turned back. Honestly, curiosity. Sarah said her friend needed help and I figured I'd see if I could offer any. But you don't need help, do you? You've got everything handled. And if I didn't? The question surprised them both. Isabella never asked for help, never admitted to needing anything from anyone. But something about this man's absolute lack of agenda made her want to, what, test him? Understand him? Figure out why he didn't fit into any category she knew? Ethan walked back to the table, and this time when he looked at her, there was something different in his expression. Not pity, she would have eviscerated him for pity, but perhaps understanding, recognition. If you didn't, he said quietly, I tell you that walls don't just keep bad things out, they keep good things out too, and that the strongest people I've ever known weren't the ones who never fell. They were the ones who learned how to ask for help when they did. I don't fall. Everyone falls eventually. Question is whether anyone's there to catch you when you do. Isabella wanted to deliver a cutting response, something that would reestablish the distance between them, remind him of his place. But before she could speak, Ethan's entire demeanor changed. It was subtle, a tension in his shoulders, a shift in his posture, the way his eyes suddenly focused on something beyond her. His hand moved slightly, and Isabella realized with a start that he'd positioned himself between her and the cafe's entrance. What? She began. Don't turn around, he said, his voice completely different now. Gone was the gentle philosophy. This was command, military grade, and absolute. 3 men just walked in, separately but together. They're positioning themselves to cover all exits. Isabella's heart rate spiked. You're being paranoid. I'm being observant. 2 of them have right-hand dominant bulges under their jackets. The third keeps his right hand in his pocket. They're not looking at the menu. They're scanning faces. This is Manhattan. Everyone's armed and paranoid. Not like this. Ethan's eyes never stopped moving, tracking, calculating. When I say move, I need you to walk, don't run, toward the back of the cafe. There's usually a rear exit in these places, near the kitchen. This is insane. I'm not... The front window exploded. Glass and sound and chaos erupted simultaneously. Isabella's mind couldn't process what was happening. The screaming, the sharp cracks that she dimly recognized as gunfire, the way Ethan grabbed her and pulled her down behind the table with a force that knocked the air from her lungs. Stay down! His body covered hers, heavy and solid and impossibly calm. Don't move. Don't make a sound. More gunshots. Someone was crying. No, multiple people were crying. Isabella could see other patrons on the floor, some crawling toward cover, others frozen in terror. Behind the counter, a young barista with pink hair was sobbing into her hands. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to people like her. She had security, had drivers, had systems in place to ensure everybody stays down. A voice, male and harsh with adrenaline, shouted from near the entrance. Hands where we can see them. Anybody tries to be a hero, people die. Ethan's weight shifted slightly, and Isabella felt him reaching for something. In the knife-sharp clarity that terror brings, she watched him pull a phone from his pocket, fingers moving with practiced efficiency to dial what she assumed was 911. But he didn't speak into the phone. Just pressed something and set it down, the screen still lit. Silent alarm, he whispered against her ear. They'll trace the location. How did you know? Later. Right now, I need you to breathe slowly. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. Can you do that? Isabella nodded, though breathing felt like trying to inhale concrete. Her perfectly ordered world had shattered as completely as that front window, and she was lying on a cafe floor with a mechanic she'd met an hour ago, while armed men. How many? She whispered. 3 confirmed. Might be more outside. His voice remained that same impossible calm, like he was discussing weather rather than a hostage situation. They're not robbing the place. This is something else. How do you know? Because they haven't gone for the register. They're watching the door, controlling the crowd. This is a perimeter, not a robbery. Isabella's analytical mind kicked in despite the terror. He was right. These weren't thieves. This was organized, military in its execution, which meant, they're looking for someone, she breathed. Specifically, someone. Smart girl. Ethan's approval was automatic. A teacher acknowledging a student's correct answer in the midst of hell. Question is who? The answer hit her like ice water. Could it be her? Meridian Capital had made enemies. She'd crushed competitors, destroyed careers, dismantled companies. Had someone finally decided that financial revenge wasn't enough? Before she could voice this theory, one of the gunmen spoke again. Anyone got a phone out, show it to me now, slowly. Isabella watched several hands raise, offering devices with shaking fingers. The gunman, she could see him now, young, maybe mid-20s, ski mask pulled over his features, collected them methodically, dropping each one into a bag. Check the back, another voice ordered. Heavy footsteps approached their position. Isabella's breathing accelerated despite Ethan's earlier instructions. The table they were behind wouldn't provide any real cover if, under the table, come out, hands first. Isabella's eyes met Ethan's, and she saw calculation there, rapid tactical assessment happening behind that storm-gray gaze. Then he did something that stopped her heart. He stood up. Easy, he said, hands raised to shoulder height. Nobody needs to get hurt here. I'll decide that. The gunman, this one older, harder looking through the mask, kept his weapon trained on Ethan's chest. Who else is back there? Just me. I was trying to hide when I heard the shots. Stupid, I know. Please, I have a daughter. I don't want trouble. The lie came so easily, delivered with just the right amount of fear mixed with desperation. Isabella, still pressed against the floor, recognized a performance when she saw one. Ethan was buying her time, drawing attention away from her position. Phone. Don't have one. Left it at work. Bullshit. I'm a mechanic. My phone died this morning, and I haven't had time to charge it. Check my pockets if you don't believe me. The gunman gestured with his weapon. Do it. Slow. Ethan complied, turning out his pockets to show nothing but a wallet, keys, and a few crumpled receipts. The phone he'd used to call for help was still on the floor next to Isabella, partially hidden by the table leg. You a mechanic? The gunman's tone suggested he was searching for something, trying to place Ethan in some larger pattern. Yeah, got a shop in Red Hook. Look, whatever this is about, I'm nobody. Just wrong place, wrong time. Let me sit down with the others, and I promise I won't be a problem. For a moment, Isabella thought it might work. The gunman seemed to be buying it, seemed ready to dismiss Ethan as just another terrified civilian. Then a child screamed. The sound cut through the cafe like a blade, pure, terrified, the kind of scream that bypasses thought and goes straight to instinct. Isabella turned her head and saw a little girl, maybe 7 years old, standing near the overturned chairs. She must have been in the bathroom when the gunmen entered, emerging now into a nightmare she couldn't possibly understand. "Mommy!" the girl shrieked, trying to run toward a woman pressed against the far wall. The nearest gunman moved to intercept her, and that's when everything changed. Ethan didn't think. Isabella saw it happen. The shift from civilian to soldier, the transformation so complete and instantaneous that it seemed like he'd been wearing the other persona as a disguise. He moved with the kind of speed and precision that came from thousands of hours of training, a lifetime of operating in violence. His hand shot out and grabbed a glass water pitcher from a nearby service station. In one fluid motion, he hurled it at the gunman, threatening the child. The pitcher caught the man square in the face, heavy glass and water combining into a stunning impact that sent him staggering backward. Ethan was already moving, closing the distance in 3 long strides. He caught the gunman's weapon hand, controlling the gun's direction with a grip that Isabella knew, even from her limited view, would leave bruises. A sharp strike to the elbow, a twist, and the weapon clattered to the floor. But there were 3 gunmen. The other 2 were already turning, already bringing their weapons to bear. "Ethan!" Isabella's warning came out as a scream. He heard her, grabbed the child with his free arm and dove behind the counter, pulling the sobbing girl into the minimal shelter just as bullets started flying. Wood and ceramic exploded around them, coffee machines sparking as rounds punched through them. The cafe descended into absolute chaos. People were screaming, scrambling, some freezing in place. The woman who had to be the child's mother was trying to reach her daughter, being held back by another patron with enough sense to keep her from getting herself killed. Isabella's mind went to a place she'd never experienced, complete, overwhelming helplessness. All her money, all her power, all her carefully constructed control, and she was useless. Worse than useless. She was a liability, someone who didn't know how to function when the world operated on rules other than the ones she'd mastered. But Ethan did. She watched him position himself to shield the girl, watched him scan the space with the kind of tactical awareness that spoke of experience in far worse situations than this. When he spoke, his voice was calm, impossibly, insanely calm, directed at the crying child in his arms. "Hey, sweetheart, I need you to be really brave for me, okay? What's your name?" "Sophie," the girl sobbed against his shoulder. "Sophie. That's a beautiful name. I'm Ethan. I have a little girl too, just about your age. Her name's Lily, and she gets scared sometimes too. You know what I tell her when she's scared?" "What?" The tiny voice was barely audible over the chaos. "I tell her that scared is okay. Scared means you're smart, that you understand when things are dangerous. But scared doesn't mean we give up. It means we breathe, and we think, and we wait for our moment. Can you do that with me? Breathe and wait." The girl nodded against his chest. "You're doing great, Sophie. Your mom is so proud of you right now." Isabella watched this exchange from her position on the floor, and something in her chest cracked. This man, this mechanic she'd dismissed, this stranger she'd looked down on, was cradling a terrified child while bullets flew, speaking to her with such gentle confidence that even Isabella felt calmer listening to him. "Enough!" The harsh voice of the gunman's leader cut through the noise. "Whoever's behind that counter, you've got 3 seconds to come out before I start shooting hostages." "Don't." Ethan's response was immediate. "I'm coming out. Don't hurt anyone." "Ethan, no!" Isabella didn't recognize her own voice, high and desperate. He didn't look at her. Carefully, he passed Sophie to the pink-haired barista who'd been hiding behind the counter. "Keep her down," he instructed quietly. "Don't let her see." Then he stood, hands raised, and stepped out into the open. The lead gunman grabbed him immediately, pressing a weapon to his temple with enough force to make Ethan grimace. "Think you're a hero?" "No, just didn't want to see a kid get hurt." "Noble. Stupid, but noble." The gunman studied him with new interest. "You move pretty well for a mechanic. Military?" Ethan said nothing. "Yeah, I thought so. Which means you know what happens next if you try that again." The weapon pressed harder. Everybody sees what happens to heroes. Isabella couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only watch as the man who'd tried to save a child, the man who'd tried to save her, stood with a gun to his head, completely at the mercy of someone who clearly had none. This was her fault, all of it. If she hadn't been so proud, so cold, if she'd just let him leave after coffee, he'd be safe in his shop in Red Hook instead of... The sound of sirens cut through her spiraling thoughts, distant but growing closer. The gunmen heard them too, tension visible even through their masks as they exchanged rapid glances. "Doesn't change anything," the leader said, but Isabella heard the uncertainty in his voice. "We're walking out of here, and you're coming with us." He addressed Ethan. "Insurance." "Let the others go," Ethan said. "They're not part of this." "They are now." The next 90 seconds felt like hours. The gunmen moved efficiently, directing hostages toward the center of the room, creating a human shield between themselves and the approaching authorities. Isabella found herself pulled to her feet, shoved into the cluster of terrified people. Her eyes found Ethan's across the chaos. He was still standing with the weapon pressed to his head, but his expression held something that took her a moment to recognize. He was calm, not resigned, not terrified, but calculating, planning. He mouthed something to her. She couldn't hear it over the noise, but she could read his lips. "Fire extinguisher, behind you." Isabella turned slightly and saw it, a red canister mounted on the wall, maybe 3 feet to her right. She looked back at Ethan, questioning, and saw him give the tiniest nod. He was going to create a diversion. He was going to risk his life, again, and he needed her to act when he did. Terror and something else, something that felt uncomfortably like purpose, flooded through Isabella's system. She'd never been in a physical confrontation in her life. Never had to be. Money and lawyers and carefully worded contracts were her weapons, civilized tools for civilized warfare. But there was nothing civilized about this. The sirens were closer now. Isabella could see the flashing lights painting the cafe's walls in blue and red. The gunmen were getting more agitated, more dangerous. The leader's grip on Ethan had tightened, and Isabella saw blood where the weapon's sight had cut into his temple. "Last chance!" a voice boomed from outside, amplified, official. "Release the hostages and come out with your hands up." The gunmen ignored this, instead pulling Ethan toward the door, using him as a shield as they prepared to negotiate or flee or whatever desperate plan they'd formulated. That's when Ethan moved. It wasn't dramatic. Wasn't the Hollywood version of heroism with flying kicks and impossible physics. It was brutal, efficient, and terrifying in its execution. He dropped his weight, creating a momentary imbalance in his captor's grip, then drove his elbow backward into the man's solar plexus with enough force to make the gunman's breath explode out in a wheeze. The weapon came away from his head. Ethan twisted, controlling the arm, controlling the weapon, and for a heartbeat, Isabella thought he'd actually pull it off. Then the other gunman opened fire. Ethan went down, pulling his captor with him, using the man's body as a shield, even as he tried to wrestle the weapon away. Bullets were flying everywhere, into walls, into furniture, into the ceiling. Someone was screaming. Maybe Isabella, maybe everyone. She didn't think, didn't let herself think. She grabbed the fire extinguisher, yanked it from its mount with strength she didn't know she possessed, and ran toward the struggling forms on the ground. One of the gunmen turned toward her. Isabella saw his weapon coming up, saw her death in the black tunnel of that barrel, and knew with absolute certainty that she'd made a terrible mistake. But she was already committed, already pulling the pin on the extinguisher, already pressing the trigger. White chemical foam exploded outward, catching the gunman full in the face. He stumbled backward, blinded, weapon discharging into the floor as his fingers spasmed on the trigger. Isabella kept the pressure on the extinguisher, swinging it wildly, coating everything in white while her mind chanted a single thought. "Don't stop, don't stop, don't stop." She heard rather than saw the door burst open, heard the shouted commands of "Police, drop your weapons!" Heard the thunderous response of gunfire and felt someone tackle her to the ground. Protective this time, a cop's armored body covering hers as the situation descended into its final, violent resolution. Then it was over. The silence after chaos is its own kind of violence. Isabella lay on the floor, covered in fire extinguisher foam, her ears ringing, her whole body shaking with adrenaline she had no idea how to process. Someone was checking her for injuries, asking her questions she couldn't quite understand. The cafe looked like a war zone. Shattered glass, overturned furniture, bullet holes decorating the walls like obscene art. And Ethan. She scrambled to her feet despite the officer trying to keep her down, her eyes searching frantically for him in the chaos. There, being helped up by two SWAT officers, one hand pressed against his side where his shirt was slowly turning red. "Ethan!" Her voice cracked on his name. He looked up, found her in the chaos, and smiled. Actually smiled, like getting shot in the middle of a Manhattan cafe was just another Tuesday. "You okay?" he called. Isabella wanted to laugh, wanted to cry, wanted to scream at him for being insane enough to ask if she was okay when he was clearly bleeding from at least one gunshot wound. Instead, she pushed through the responding officers and EMTs until she reached him, her hands hovering uselessly over his injury because she didn't know what to do, didn't know how to help, didn't know anything except that this man had saved her life twice in the span of 10 minutes. "You're an idiot," she said, and her voice was shaking. "A complete, absolute idiot." "Yeah," he agreed, wincing as a paramedic started examining his side. "I get that a lot. You could have been killed. You could have—" Isabella's voice broke, and she realized with horror that she was crying. She never cried. Crying was weakness, was loss of control, was everything she'd spent a lifetime avoiding. Ethan's hand caught hers. His grip was bloody and weak, but warm. "Hey, I'm okay. You're okay. Sophie's okay. That's what matters." "Ma'am, we need to get him to the hospital," the paramedic said gently. "Are you injured? Do you need medical attention?" Isabella shook her head, unable to form words. She watched them load Ethan onto a stretcher, watched him wince as they moved him, watched his blood stain the white sheets they'd wrapped around him. "Isabella," his voice stopped her as she started to turn away. "Thank you. The fire extinguisher thing? That was pretty badass." Despite everything, the terror, the violence, the complete destruction of her ordinary reality, Isabella Sterling, Ice Queen of Wall Street, laughed. It came out choked and half hysterical, but it was genuine. "Pretty badass," she repeated. "I'll put that on my business cards." "Ma'am?" Another officer approached, this one detective grade from the look of him. "I need to get your statement about what happened here." Isabella nodded numbly. "Of course." Statements, police reports, the machinery of law and order grinding into motion. Her world, the world of rules and procedures and proper channels, reasserting itself over the chaos. But as she watched the ambulance pull away with Ethan inside, as she stood in the wreckage of the cafe still covered in fire extinguisher foam, Isabella realized something fundamental had shifted. The walls she'd built, the tower she'd climbed, the distance she'd so carefully maintained between herself and the messy, dangerous, unpredictable world, it had all been an illusion. She wasn't invulnerable, wasn't untouchable, wasn't safe just because she had money and power and a corner office 47 stories above the street. And the man who'd shown her this truth, just a mechanic she'd almost dismissed with contempt, had done it by putting himself between her and death without hesitation, without expectation, without anything except the kind of courage she'd never had to possess. The officer was still waiting for her statement. Isabella took a breath, squared her shoulders, and began to speak. But in the back of her mind, below the recitation of facts and timeline, a single thought kept circling. Everything had changed. She just didn't know yet what that meant. The detective's name was Morrison, and he had the weary eyes of someone who'd seen too much of humanity's worst impulses. He guided Isabella to one of the few intact chairs in the cafe, his hand gentle on her elbow as if she might shatter at any moment. Maybe she would. She wasn't entirely sure what was holding her together anymore. "Start from the beginning," Morrison said, his voice professionally kind. "When did you first notice something was wrong?" Isabella opened her mouth to answer and found her mind completely blank. When had it started? The moment the window exploded? No, before that. Ethan's warning, the way he'd changed, tension flooding his body like someone had flipped a switch. "The man I was with, Ethan Carter, he noticed them first," she heard herself say. Her voice sounded strange, disconnected. 3 men entering separately. He said they were positioning themselves to cover exits. And you believed him? No. The word came out sharp, edged with something that might have been shame. "I thought he was being paranoid, dramatic. I told him this was Manhattan, that everyone was armed and paranoid." Morrison made a note. But he was right. He was right about everything. Isabella stared at her hands, still trembling slightly, still smudged with the residue of fire extinguisher foam. He knew they weren't robbing the place, knew they were looking for someone specific. When they came toward us, he put himself between them and me. The witness statements say he disarmed one of the suspects. That true? A child screamed. There was a little girl, Sophie, I think her name was. One of the gunmen went after her, and Ethan just moved, like he'd done it 1,000 times before. Isabella looked up at Morrison. He was special forces, wasn't he? The way he fought, the way he handled everything. That wasn't civilian self-defense training. Morrison's expression remained carefully neutral. I can't discuss another witness's background, but between you and me? Yeah. That kind of response comes from serious training and experience. He paused. You're lucky he was there. Lucky. The word felt absurd. Lucky implied chance, randomness, the casual intersection of circumstance. But sitting here in the wreckage, Isabella couldn't shake the feeling that nothing about this morning had been random at all. Detective, those men, they weren't after the register. They didn't demand money or try to rob anyone. They were controlling the space, securing perimeters. That's military language, isn't it? Military thinking? You're very observant, Ms. Sterling. I analyze patterns for a living, risk assessment, threat modeling, predicting behavior based on incomplete data. Isabella leaned forward, her analyst's mind finally engaging with something it could process. This wasn't random violence. This was an operation. So what were they operating toward? Who were they looking for? Morrison studied her for a long moment. That's what we're trying to determine. The 3 suspects are in custody, 2 injured, 1 critical. We'll know more once we can question them. He flipped his notebook to a fresh page. Now I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. Is there anyone who might want to harm you? Business rivals, disgruntled employees, anyone you've had conflicts with? The question landed exactly where Isabella's thoughts had been circling since the shooting started. Meridian Capital had made enemies. She'd made enemies. In the ruthless ecosystem of high finance, you didn't build a $7 billion empire without crushing some throats along the way. There's a list, she admitted quietly, a long one. I've destroyed careers, dismantled companies, cost people fortunes. 3 months ago, I orchestrated a hostile takeover of Brennan Industries. Richard Brennan swore he'd make me pay for it. His exact words were, "I'll see you burn for this." We'll look into it. Morrison made notes. Anyone else? Isabella closed her eyes, running through the catalog of her professional devastations. Marcus Tillman, former CFO of a company we acquired. He blamed me personally for losing his position, sent emails, made threats on social media before his lawyers made him stop. Catherine Wu, I exposed accounting fraud at her firm, cost her everything. She's currently awaiting trial. She opened her eyes. Should I continue? Because I can. That's what winning looks like in my world, detective. It looks like a trail of people who'd celebrate if I died. Morrison's expression had shifted to something that might have been pity. We'll need those names. All of them. And Ms. Sterling, you might want to consider personal security until we figure out what today was really about. Personal security. Bodyguards. The physical manifestation of vulnerability she'd spent her life denying. Isabella wanted to refuse, to insist she didn't need protection, that she could handle whatever came next with the same cold competence she applied to everything else. But she kept seeing Ethan's blood staining those white sheets, kept hearing Sophie's terrified screams, kept feeling the weight of that fire extinguisher in her hands and the absolute certainty that she was about to die. Okay, she said simply. Morrison looked surprised, like he'd expected an argument. Good, smart. We'll have officers keep an eye on you until you can make private arrangements. He stood, tucking his notebook away. I'll need you to come down to the station tomorrow, go through some photos, see if you recognize any of the suspects. For now, get somewhere safe. And Ms. Sterling, that thing you did with the fire extinguisher probably saved lives, including your own. Isabella nodded numbly, watching him walk away to question other witnesses. Around her, crime scene technicians were photographing bullet holes, collecting evidence, reconstructing the violence with clinical precision. The pink-haired barista was being interviewed while Sophie clung to her mother nearby, her face buried in the woman's shoulder. That little girl had almost died. would have died if Ethan hadn't. Isabella's phone buzzed in her pocket, survived intact despite everything. She pulled it out to find 73 missed calls, over 100 texts, and what looked like every news outlet in New York trying to reach her. The shooting had already hit the media cycle, complete with shaky phone footage from witnesses outside and helicopter shots of the SWAT response. One text stood out from Marcus, her assistant. "Are you alive? Please tell me you're alive. Office is in chaos. Board wants emergency meeting." Of course they did. The CEO of Meridian Capital, caught in a hostage situation, was exactly the kind of crisis that sent boards into panic mode. They'd want assurances, want risk assessments, want to know if this would affect stock prices or investor confidence or any of the 1,000 metrics that mattered more than actual human lives. She should call them, should start managing the situation, controlling the narrative, doing all the things Ice Queens did when their carefully constructed worlds developed cracks. Instead, she texted back, "Alive. Going to hospital. We'll call tomorrow." Then she turned off her phone. The action felt revolutionary, like she'd just detonated a bomb under her own perfectly ordered existence. Isabella Sterling did not turn off her phone, did not ignore her board, did not prioritize anything over Meridian Capital's interests. But Isabella Sterling had also never grabbed a fire extinguisher and charged at armed gunmen, so apparently today was full of surprises. "Ms. Sterling?" A young uniformed officer approached, her expression sympathetic. "I'm Officer Chen. Detective Morrison asked me to arrange transport for you. Where would you like to go?" Where would she like to go? The question seemed impossibly vast. Home. Her penthouse apartment with its white furniture and minimalist decor and oppressive silence? The office. Her sanctuary of glass and steel and controlled perfection? The hospital, Isabella heard herself say. Whichever one they took Ethan Carter to. Officer Chen nodded like this made perfect sense. Presbyterian. I'll have someone drive you. The ride took 20 minutes through traffic that parted reluctantly for the patrol car's flashing lights. Isabella sat in the back, staring out the window at a city that looked exactly the same as it had this morning, despite the fact that her entire understanding of reality had been violently reorganized. People walked dogs, delivered packages, argued on cell phones, lived their lives in blissful ignorance of how quickly everything could shatter. She'd been one of them until 2 hours ago. Had believed that money and power and strategic thinking could insulate her from the chaos that afflicted ordinary people. The cafe shooting had stripped that illusion away with brutal efficiency, leaving her with the uncomfortable recognition that she was just as fragile, just as vulnerable, just as human as everyone else. The hospital's emergency room was controlled chaos, nurses moving with purposeful efficiency, doctors barking orders, the ambient sound of suffering and hope mixing into something simultaneously terrible and sacred. Isabella approached the admissions desk, suddenly aware of how she must look. Expensive suit covered in white foam residue, hair escaping from its usually perfect style, traces of someone else's blood on her hands. "I'm looking for Ethan Carter," she told the nurse. He was brought in from the cafe shooting, gunshot wound. The nurse's fingers flew across her keyboard. "Are you family?" Isabella paused. What was she? A client? An acquaintance? Someone whose life he'd saved multiple times in the span of an hour? "I was with him when it happened. Please, I need to know if he's okay." Something in her voice must have conveyed the desperation beneath the words, because the nurse's expression softened. "He's in surgery, gunshot wound to the side, but the bullet missed anything vital. Doctor said he was lucky, couple inches to the left, and we'd be having a very different conversation." She gestured toward a waiting area. "It'll be a few hours before he's out. You're welcome to wait." Isabella nodded and made her way to the plastic chairs that seemed designed to maximize discomfort. She sat, and for the first time since the shooting started, allowed herself to simply exist in the moment. No analyzing, no strategizing, just sitting with the reality that a man she barely knew had taken a bullet, and she couldn't stop thinking about the way he'd smiled at Sophie while chaos exploded around them. Isabella Sterling? She looked up to find a woman standing in front of her, early 30s, elegant in the way that suggested old money rather than earned wealth, dark hair pulled back in a style similar to Isabella's own, Her eyes were red, like she'd been crying recently. Yes? I'm Rachel Morrison, Sophie's mother. The woman's voice wavered. The officers told me what you did, how you and Mr. Carter saved my daughter. Isabella stood, unsure of the protocol for this situation. Hallmark didn't make cards for, sorry your daughter was taken hostage, glad my fire extinguisher helped. I'm just glad she's safe, Isabella said, and meant it with an intensity that surprised her. She won't stop talking about the nice man who held her. Rachel's smile was watery. Says he promised to introduce her to his daughter Lily, that they can have a play date once all the scary stuff is over. Her expression grew more serious. The officer also said Mr. Carter was shot. Is he? Surgery. They think he'll be okay. Rachel nodded, relief visible in the slump of her shoulders. Thank God. I don't know what would have happened if he hadn't. She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. I wanted to thank you both, properly. Not just words, but I'm sorry, I'm not making sense. It's been a terrible morning. You don't need to thank me, Isabella said quietly. Ethan's the one who saved her. Saved all of us, really. I just reacted. You charged armed men with a fire extinguisher. That's not reacting. That's being extraordinary. Rachel reached into her purse, pulled out a business card. My husband and I own Morrison Gallery in Chelsea. If there's ever anything we can do for you or Mr. Carter, anything at all, please don't hesitate to call. Isabella took the card more out of politeness than any intention of using it. Rachel Morrison squeezed her hand once, then left, presumably to return to Sophie and begin the long process of helping a 7-year-old make sense of trauma. The waiting room's clock ticked forward with aggressive slowness. Isabella tried to focus on her phone, turned it back on despite her earlier rebellion, watched the messages pile up with almost comedic speed. But she couldn't concentrate on board politics or investor concerns or any of the things that usually commanded her complete attention. Instead, she kept replaying the morning. Ethan's quiet observations about her tower, his refusal to be impressed or intimidated by her success. The way he'd transformed from philosopher to warrior in a heartbeat, his blood on her hands. Miss Sterling? Isabella looked up to find a doctor approaching, still in surgical scrubs, her face tired but not grim. That was good. Grim was bad. I'm Dr. Palmer. I just finished Mr. Carter's surgery. She sat down in the chair beside Isabella, professional distance giving way to something more human. The bullet entered his right side, traveled through muscle tissue, and lodged against his lower rib. We were able to extract it without complications. Barring infection, he should make a full recovery. The relief that flooded through Isabella's system was disproportionate to their acquaintance. She barely knew this man, had no claim on him, no reason to care beyond basic human decency. And yet hearing that he'd be okay made her want to cry again, which was becoming an alarming pattern. When can I see him? He's in recovery now, should be moved to a room in about an hour. Dr. Palmer studied Isabella with the assessing gaze of someone trained to read what patients didn't say. This isn't the first time he's been shot. Did you know that? Isabella shook her head. He has significant scarring, old wounds, some of them pretty severe. Military, I'd guess. The doctor's expression grew thoughtful. When he was coming out of anesthesia, he kept asking about someone, kept saying, is she okay? Is Isabella okay? That you. Yes. The word came out barely above a whisper. Well, you can tell him yourself when he's awake. Dr. Palmer stood, then paused. Whatever happened today, he clearly thinks you're worth taking a bullet for. That's not nothing. The doctor left, and Isabella sat in the uncomfortable chair processing this information. Ethan had been asking about her, had been worried about her despite being the one with a hole in his side that required surgery. An hour passed, then another. Isabella declined offers from hospital staff to get her coffee or food or anything that would require her to leave the waiting area. She'd already turned her phone off again, ignoring the digital avalanche of demands on her attention. Let the board panic. Let the investors worry. Let her entire carefully constructed empire teeter while she sat in a hospital waiting room covered in fire extinguisher residue. For the first time in her adult life, Isabella Sterling had absolutely no idea what she was doing, and strangely, that felt almost like freedom. Ms. Sterling, A nurse appeared, young and genuinely kind. "Mr. Carter's awake. Room 347 if you'd like to see him." Isabella followed her through corridors that all looked identical, past rooms containing strangers suffering, until they reached a door marked with Ethan's name on a whiteboard. She paused outside, suddenly uncertain. What did you say to someone who'd saved your life? Thank you seemed inadequate. How are you feeling seemed ridiculous given the circumstances. Sorry I got you shot was probably accurate, but not particularly helpful. She knocked quietly and pushed the door open. Ethan was half reclined in the hospital bed, pale but alert, an IV running into his left arm and monitoring equipment beeping steadily beside him. He wore a hospital gown that somehow made him look more vulnerable than anything else she'd seen today. When he saw her, his face split into a smile that was equal parts genuine pleasure and obvious pain. "Hey," he said, his voice rough. "You made it. You got shot." Isabella heard the accusation in her own voice, like this was somehow a personal failing on his part. "Little bit, yeah," he gestured at his bandaged side. "Doctor says I'll be fine. Bullet missed the important stuff." Isabella walked to his bedside, her hands useless at her sides. "You could have died. You should have just... You didn't have to..." "Yes, I did." Simple. Absolute. No room for argument. "Why?" The word exploded out of her. "Why would you do that? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. I was terrible to you this morning, looked down on you, dismissed everything you said. And then when things went bad, you just..." Her voice broke. "You just kept saving people. That little girl, those other hostages, me. Why?" Ethan was quiet for a moment, his storm gray eyes studying her with that same uncomfortable perception he'd shown in the cafe. "You want the simple answer or the real one?" "Real. Always real." "Because I could." He shifted slightly, wincing at the movement. "I've had training, experience, been in situations way worse than today. When that window exploded, my brain went to a place it knows. Tactical assessment, threat neutralization, protecting civilians. It's not heroic, Isabella. It's just reflex. Muscle memory from a life I used to live." That's not an answer. That's a description of capability, not motivation. Lots of people could do things they choose not to do. Isabella moved closer, needing him to understand. "You chose to act, chose to risk yourself. And I need to know why, because nothing in my understanding of human nature accounts for what you did." "Your understanding of human nature comes from Wall Street." Ethan's smile was gentle, without judgment. "That's a place where self-interest rules, where people calculate cost-benefit on everything, including relationships. But not everyone operates that way. So you're just naturally selfless? Is that what you're telling me?" "God, no." He laughed, then immediately regretted it, pressing a hand to his bandaged side. "I'm selfish in all sorts of ways, but I have a daughter. She's 8 years old, smartest person I know, and she believes the world is fundamentally good, that people help each other, that heroes are real." His expression grew distant. "I've seen too much darkness, Isabella. Done things in the name of duty that still wake me up at night. But when I look at Lily, I want her to be right. Want to be the kind of person who justifies her faith in humanity. So you risk your life to maintain your daughter's innocence?" Isabella heard the skepticism in her voice. "That seems like a complicated rationalization for basic hero complex behavior." "Maybe." Ethan didn't seem offended by her analysis. "Or maybe I just don't believe you should stand by when you can help. You didn't either, by the way. I grabbed a fire extinguisher in a panic. That's not the same as what you did. Isn't it? You had every reason to stay down, stay safe, let the professionals handle it. But you saw someone in danger and you acted. That fire extinguisher thing probably saved my life." His hand reached out, caught hers. His grip was warm despite the hospital's aggressive air conditioning. "You're braver than you think, Isabella Sterling." "I'm not brave, I'm terrified. I've been terrified for..." Isabella stopped, unsure how to finish that sentence. Terrified for years? For her entire adult life? "I built my whole existence around control, around never being vulnerable, never being at someone else's mercy. And today showed me how completely illusory all of that was. 3 men with guns, and suddenly my $7 billion meant absolutely nothing. Money's just a tool, Ethan said quietly. It can't make you bulletproof, can't guarantee safety or happiness or connection. It's useful, sure, but it's not the same as actual security. Then what is? Actual security, I mean. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, his thumb absently tracing circles on the back of her hand. Isabella realized she should probably pull away. They barely knew each other. This was inappropriately intimate, but she didn't want to. His touch anchored her somehow, made the hospital room feel less sterile and terrible. People, he said finally. Real security comes from having people who care about you, who'd show up when things go bad, who'd grab fire extinguishers and charge armed gunmen because the alternative is watching you get hurt. He smiled. Turns out you're pretty good at that. This morning you called my life lonely. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. Was overstepping. No. Isabella squeezed his hand. You were right. It is lonely. I've made it that way deliberately, thinking isolation was the same as independence. Thinking if I didn't need anyone, no one could hurt me. But all I really accomplished was building a very tall, very cold tower where I could watch life happen to other people. Towers can have visitors, Ethan suggested. You don't have to demolish the whole thing, just maybe install a better door. Despite everything, the trauma, the fear, the complete reorganization of her reality, Isabella laughed. Did you seriously just turn my metaphorical isolation into a home improvement project? I'm a mechanic. Everything looks like a thing that needs fixing. His smile faded slightly, growing more serious. But I mean it. You don't have to be what you've been. People can change. Hell, I used to kill people for a living, and now I restore motorcycles and pack princess-themed lunches. Change is possible if you want it. I don't know what I want anymore. The admission felt huge, terrifying. Isabella Sterling always knew what she wanted, had built her entire identity on certainty and purpose. This morning, I wanted to win at everything, and now I don't even know what winning looks like anymore. Maybe winning looks different than you thought, Ethan suggested. Maybe it looks like Sophie getting to grow up without trauma, like that pink-haired barista going home to her family, like both of us sitting here having this conversation instead of being in the morgue. You almost died today. Because of me. Because we were together. Because, hey! Ethan's voice firmed, command creeping back into his tone. Don't do that. Don't make this your fault. Bad people did a bad thing. You and I responded. That's the whole story. The detective thinks they might have been targeting me specifically, Isabella said quietly. He asked about enemies, business rivals, people who might want to hurt me. The list was extensive. Ethan's expression darkened. They give you protection? Police escort until I arrange private security. She gestured vaguely at the door. There's an officer outside right now. Apparently I'm a person of interest in an active investigation, which is a professional first for me. Good. Keep the security. Don't take chances. His hand tightened on hers. Promise me. Why do you care? We met 4 hours ago, and most of that time was spent with you saving my life in various ways. You don't actually know me, Ethan. I know enough. His storm gray eyes held hers. I know you're brilliant and driven and scared underneath all that ice. I know you charged armed men to help me, even though you were terrified. I know you stood in that cafe and asked smart questions while everyone else was panicking. And I know you came here to check on me instead of going back to your tower. He paused. That's enough to care. Isabella wanted to argue, to point out the logical flaws in forming attachments based on shared trauma, to explain why this was temporary and situational and absolutely could not continue once they returned to their normal lives. Instead, she said, your daughter, Lily, you mentioned her when you were with Sophie. Ethan's entire face transformed at the mention of his daughter. The pain and exhaustion gave way to something softer, warmer. Yeah, she's 8, like I said, going on 35 in terms of how much wisdom she dispenses. Lost her mother 3 years ago, cancer, so it's just been us since then. I'm sorry. The words felt inadequate, but Isabella meant them. She tried to imagine losing someone that fundamentally, having your entire world reorganize around absence. That must have been devastating. It was, Simple, honest. Lily was 5 when Sarah died. Too young to really understand, but old enough to hurt. We figured it out together, though. Learned how to be a family of 2 instead of 3. It's not the life I planned, but it's a good one. Is that why you left the military? To take care of her? Yeah, being a single dad and doing what I did. They weren't compatible. So I chose her, got out, found work that let me be present. He smiled slightly. Turns out I'm pretty good at fixing engines. Who knew? You gave up your career, your identity. I gave up a job. My identity is being Lily's dad. Everything else is just details. He shifted in the bed, trying to find a more comfortable position. She's going to have questions when I tell her about today. Going to want to know if I'm okay, if anyone else got hurt, or all of it. Kid has a journalist's instinct for ferreting out the truth. What will you tell her? That her dad helped some people who needed it. That sometimes scary things happen, but most people are good and brave when it matters. That she should be proud of the nice lady who helped save her dad with a fire extinguisher. His smile turned mischievous despite the obvious pain. She's going to want to meet you now, just warning you. Meet me. Isabella felt panic flutter in her chest. Why would she want to meet me? Because you're part of the story now. Because Lily believes in thanking people who do good things. Because 8-year-olds don't have the same social boundaries as adults. Ethan watched her reaction with interest. Would that be okay? Meeting her sometime? Isabella had no experience with children, avoided them generally, finding their unpredictability and emotional volatility exhausting. Kids didn't understand corporate hierarchies or professional boundaries. They asked uncomfortable questions and expected honest answers, and generally violated every rule Isabella had built her life around. I'd like that, she heard herself say, and was shocked to realize she meant it. Before Ethan could respond, the door opened and a nurse entered, professionally cheerful despite the late hour. Sorry to interrupt, but I need to check vitals and change the dressing. It'll take about 20 minutes. Isabella stood immediately, recognizing dismissal. I should go anyway. Let you rest. Isabella, Ethan caught her hand again. Thank you for coming, for checking on me. You didn't have to. Yes, she said softly, echoing his earlier words. I did. She made it to the hallway before the shaking started. Adrenaline crash her rational mind supplied. Delayed stress response. Completely normal after traumatic events. Her body apparently disagreed with this assessment, deciding instead to stage a full rebellion. Trembling hands, rapid heartbeat, breathing that wouldn't quite regulate. Ma'am, you okay? The officer stationed outside Ethan's room, young, concerned, reached out to steady her. Fine, just need a moment. Isabella pressed her back against the wall, focusing on the breathing technique Ethan had taught her during the shooting. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. The fact that she was using crisis management skills learned during an active hostage situation to handle a hospital hallway said something profound about how far her day had deteriorated. Her phone buzzed insistently in her pocket. She pulled it out to find Marcus calling for the 20th time. With a sigh, she answered. I'm alive, she said before he could speak. I'm at the hospital, I'm uninjured, and I'll deal with the board tomorrow. Thank God. Marcus's relief was audible. Isabella, everyone's been frantic. The stories everywhere. CNN, MSNBC, all the networks. They have footage of you in the cafe, covered in that foam, looking what? Human, Marcus said quietly. Scared. Real. The Ice Queen melted on live television, and people are actually sympathizing. Your social media mentions are through the roof, people calling you brave, a hero. Isabella closed her eyes. Of course, because this was her life now. Personal trauma transformed into public spectacle, vulnerability commodified for media consumption. Handle it. Release a statement that I'm grateful for the first responders, that my thoughts are with the other victims, all the usual corporate empathy language. Already did. But Isabella, the board wants answers. They want to know if this was random or targeted. They want a security assessment, a risk evaluation, a plan for... Marcus. Her voice could have frozen nitrogen. I got held hostage this morning. Someone who helped me is in surgery. I have blood on my clothes and my hands won't stop shaking, so the board can wait 24 hours for their precious assessments. Clear? Silence. Then, carefully, crystal clear. I'll hold them off. Just take care of yourself, okay? For once, just take care of yourself. Isabella ended the call and realized the officer was still watching her with concern. I'm fine, she said again, more firmly this time. Thank you. She made her way through the hospital's maze of corridors, following signs toward the exit. The emergency room waiting area was still chaotic. Apparently, trauma didn't pause for anyone's convenience. She was almost to the doors when someone called her name. Miss Sterling? Isabella Sterling? She turned to find a man in his 50s, well-dressed, with the kind of face that suggested either too much stress or too much cosmetic surgery. He approached with his hand extended, and something in his expression made Isabella's defensive instincts flare. I'm Robert Harding, he said, attorney representing the Uncommon Grounds Cafe. I wanted to speak with you about this morning's incident. Your client should speak with my lawyers. I'm not making any statements without legal representation. Corporate Isabella, all ice and efficiency, sliding back into place like armor. This isn't about liability, Harding said quickly. Quite the opposite. My client wants to thank you. What you did, the fire extinguisher, helping neutralize the threats, potentially saved lives and definitely saved the cafe from even worse damage. We're grateful. Isabella blinked, recalibrating. Not a lawsuit, a thank you. When had thank you started feeling more suspicious than litigation? I'm glad I could help, she said carefully. Is there anything else? Actually, yes. Harding pulled out a business card. My firm specializes in security consultation for corporate clients. Given that today's attack may have been targeted at you specifically, you might want to consider more comprehensive protection than standard bodyguards. We work with former intelligence personnel, advanced threat assessment, the whole package. There it was. The angle. Nothing was ever just gratitude. There was always an agenda, always someone trying to profit from disaster. I'll keep that in mind, Isabella said, taking the card more to end the conversation than from any real interest. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to leave. She made it outside before her phone rang again. Sarah this time. Isabella almost didn't answer, couldn't face her friend's guilt over the matchmaking disaster that had nearly gotten them both killed. But ignoring Sarah was impossible. The woman had the persistence of water wearing down stone. Before you say anything, Sarah's voice was thick with tears. I am so sorry. I thought I was being helpful, thought maybe you two would hit it off, have coffee, discuss motorcycles or whatever. I never imagined... God, Isabella, when I saw the news... Sarah, breathe. Isabella found herself using the same calm tone Ethan had employed with her. I'm okay. Ethan's okay. We're both alive and relatively undamaged. You couldn't have known. I put you in danger. I set up that meeting, practically pushed you into that cafe. You tried to set me up on a date. The armed gunmen were somewhat outside your control. Isabella leaned against the hospital's exterior wall, suddenly exhausted. Also, for what it's worth, Ethan's remarkable. You were right about that. Remarkable enough that you stayed at the hospital for 5 hours waiting to see him? Sarah's voice carried a note of knowing that made Isabella uncomfortable. Marcus told me where you were. Said you turned off your phone, ignored the board, basically went completely off grid to check on your mechanic. He's not my mechanic, but you care about him. Did she? Isabella tried to inventory her feelings and found the usual analytical clarity completely absent. She cared that Ethan was okay, cared in a way that felt disproportionate to their brief acquaintance but utterly genuine. The thought of him being seriously hurt made her chest tight. The memory of his smile in that hospital room made something warm unfold in her stomach. I don't know what I feel, she admitted. Today broke something in me, Sarah. Or maybe fixed something. I genuinely can't tell which. All I know is that man saved my life multiple times, got shot protecting people, and then asked if I was okay before worrying about his own injuries. And I've never met anyone like that before. Because you've spent 15 years surrounding yourself with people like us, Sarah said gently. People who calculate every interaction, who measure relationships in terms of utility and advantage. Ethan doesn't operate that way. No, he doesn't. Isabella watched an ambulance pull up, disgorging another emergency, another crisis, another life teetering on the edge. Sarah, do you ever wonder if we're missing something? If all our success and power and careful planning is just elaborate distraction from actually living? The line was quiet for a long moment. Then, every single day. But I'm too afraid to do anything about it. Yeah, Isabella said softly. Me too. They talked for a few more minutes, Sarah extracting promises that Isabella would call if she needed anything, Isabella assuring her friend that their friendship was intact despite the day's chaos. After they hung up, Isabella stood in the cold November evening and tried to decide where to go. Not home. Her apartment felt too empty suddenly, too much a monument to solitude. Not the office. She'd probably throw something at the board if they tried to meet tonight. Where did people go when their entire worldview had been violently reorganized? Her phone buzzed with a text from Officer Chen, her escort. Ready to take you wherever you need to go, Ms. Sterling. Isabella looked up at the hospital's lit windows, wondered which one was Ethan's room, wondered if he was awake or sedated or thinking about his daughter. Then she climbed into the patrol car and gave the officer her address. The penthouse apartment was exactly as she'd left it that morning, which felt impossible given that an entire lifetime had occurred in the interim. White furniture, minimalist decor, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of Manhattan that real estate agents called breathtaking, and Isabella now recognized as another form of distance. 47 stories between her and the messy, dangerous, beautiful world below. She stood at those windows for a long time, still wearing her ruined suit, and watched the city lights flicker in the darkness. Somewhere out there, Sophie was probably having nightmares. Rachel Morrison was holding her daughter too tight. Ethan was lying in a hospital bed with a bullet wound he'd acquired saving strangers. And Isabella Sterling, Ice Queen of Wall Street, was starting to suspect that her tower wasn't protection at all. It was just a very expensive prison. Isabella didn't sleep that night. She tried, changed into silk pajamas, lay in her $1,000 sheets, closed her eyes, and willed her mind to quiet. But every time she started to drift, she'd jerk awake with the sound of shattering glass echoing in her ears, or the sharp crack of gunfire, or worse, the wet sound of Ethan hitting the floor with blood spreading across his shirt. At 3 a.m, she gave up and went to her home office, pulling up security footage from Meridian Capital's building. She watched herself arrive that morning, confident stride, designer suit, the armor of success worn so comfortably she'd forgotten it was armor at all. Watched herself 7 hours ago when the worst thing she'd imagined happening that day was a boring meeting with a mechanic her friend had set her up with. God, she'd been so dismissive, so certain of her superiority, so quick to judge Ethan as beneath her consideration. The memory made her cringe with something that might have been shame. Her phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. It's Ethan. Got your number from Sarah. Hope that's okay. Just wanted to let you know they're releasing me this afternoon. Lily's beside herself wanting to meet the fire extinguisher lady. No pressure, but if you wanted to stop by the shop sometime this week, we'd both be glad to see you. Isabella stared at the message for a full minute, trying to decode it for hidden meanings or agendas, but there was nothing there except genuine invitation, the kind of simple human connection she'd spent years avoiding. She typed back, I'd like that. Let me know when works for you. Then, after a pause, added, How are you feeling? The response came quickly. Like I got shot, but I've had worse. Get some sleep, Isabella. Tomorrow's going to be intense. He wasn't wrong. By the time she made it to the office at 7, early even by her standards, the lobby was already swarming with reporters held at bay by extra security. Marcus met her at the elevator with 2 extra-large coffees and an expression that suggested he'd also had no sleep. Conference room now, he said without preamble. Board assembled at 6:30. They've been waiting. Isabella took the coffee and squared her shoulders. Back to the tower, back to the ice, back to being the person who'd built an empire through sheer force of will and absolute control. The conference room fell silent when she entered. 12 board members, titans of industry, investment gurus, people whose collective net worth could purchase small countries, all staring at her with varying degrees of concern, suspicion, and calculation. Good morning, Isabella said, her voice steady despite the exhaustion and trauma. I assume you have questions? Richard Brennan, The man whose company she'd dismantled 6 months ago, now a board member through the complex machinations of corporate politics, leaned forward with barely concealed hostility. Questions? Mr. Sterling, you were involved in a hostage situation that's now national news. Our stock dropped 2 points at opening bell. Our investors are panicking. Our insurance carriers are demanding risk assessments. So yes, we have questions. Then ask them. Was this attack targeted at you specifically? This from Margaret Chen, one of the few board members Isabella actually respected. The police are investigating that possibility. I've provided them with a list of potential enemies, professional conflicts, hostile takeovers, the usual consequences of doing business at our level. They'll determine if there's a credible threat. A list, Brennan repeated. How long a list are we talking about? Long enough to suggest I've been effective at my job. Isabella's smile could have cut glass. You don't build what I've built by making friends. You all know that. Some of you are on that list yourselves, if we're being honest. The temperature in the room dropped several degrees. Marcus made a small sound that might have been a suppressed laugh or a heart attack. That's incredibly reckless, Brennan said, his face reddening. Your personal vendettas are now a corporate liability. My personal vendettas are called business strategy, and they've increased Meridian Capital's value by $3 billion in the last 18 months alone. Isabella's voice remained level, but steel ran underneath it. If you'd prefer a CEO who plays nice and watches our competitors eat our lunch, I'm sure you can find one, but you won't find one who delivers my results. No one's questioning your results, Margaret interjected smoothly. But Richard has a point. If this attack was targeted, if you're in danger, that becomes a corporate concern. We need to discuss security protocols, crisis management, possibly even a temporary leave of absence until— No. The word came out flat and absolute. Isabella, I'm not taking leave. I'm not hiding. And I'm not letting terrorists, because that's what they were, regardless of their specific motivation, dictate how I run my company or my life. She stood, placing her palms on the table and leaning forward. Here's what's going to happen. I'm hiring private security, comprehensive and professional. I'm cooperating fully with the police investigation. I'm implementing new safety protocols for all senior leadership, and I'm getting back to work, because that's what we do. We don't surrender to fear. Easy to say when you're not the one who might be targeted, Brennan muttered. Isabella turned to him with a smile that held no warmth whatsoever. I was there, Richard. I watched people get shot. I had guns pointed at my face. I grabbed a fire extinguisher and fought back because the alternative was dying on a cafe floor. So please, tell me more about what it's easy for me to say. The room was silent. Even Brennan had the grace to look somewhat abashed. There's something else, Margaret said quietly. The media coverage of yesterday's incident has been unusual. Typically, executives caught in violent situations are portrayed as victims. But the footage of you, the way you handled yourself, the fire extinguisher, helping that man who saved the child, it's being framed as heroic. Your approval ratings are up 40 points. Social media is calling you everything from brave to inspirational. I'm not interested in approval ratings. Perhaps you should be. This changes the narrative around Meridian Capital, changes the narrative around you. Margaret pulled up a tablet, showed Isabella a montage of headlines. Ice Queen melts. CEO risks life to save hostages. Wall Street warrior, how Isabella Sterling fought back. From boardroom to battlefield, the CEO who refused to be a victim. Isabella stared at the screen, feeling something uncomfortable twist in her stomach. They were turning her trauma into branding opportunity. Her fear into feel-good story. The worst morning of her life into corporate mythology. We could leverage this, one of the younger board members suggested. Position Meridian Capital as socially conscious, community-oriented. Show that we care about more than just profits. We don't care about more than profits, Isabella said coldly. That's always been the point. Maybe it shouldn't be, Margaret said, and there was something in her tone that made Isabella look up sharply. I've been in this business 40 years, Isabella. Watched it evolve from something that actually built things, infrastructure, innovation, progress, into a casino where we just move money around and call it productivity. What happened yesterday? That little girl who almost died. That's real. That matters. Maybe it's time we remembered that. The words landed like stones in still water, ripples spreading outward in ways Isabella couldn't quite process. She thought of Sophie's terrified screams, of Ethan's blood, of the way the pink-haired barista had held a child while the world exploded around them. "This meeting is over," Isabella said abruptly. "Marcus will send out the security protocols by end of day. If you have concerns about my leadership, we can discuss them at the quarterly review. Until then, I have work to do." She left before anyone could object, Marcus scrambling to follow her back to her office. Once inside, with the door safely closed, she pressed her palms against the glass wall and tried to breathe. "That was either brilliant or career suicide," Marcus observed. "I honestly can't tell which." "Neither can I." Isabella turned to face him. "Marcus, I need you to do something for me, quietly, off the books." His expression grew wary. "Okay. I want you to research the survivors from yesterday. All of them. The barista, Sophie's mother, anyone who was in that cafe. Find out if they need help, medical bills, therapy, lost wages, anything. And then I want you to set up a fund to cover it." Marcus blinked. "You want to give them money?" "Yes. May I ask why?" "Because they were there, because I was there. Because a little girl has nightmares now that she might not have had otherwise. Because it's the right thing to do." Isabella heard how foreign those words sounded coming from her mouth. When had she last done something simply because it was right, rather than because it was strategic? "I'll take care of it," Marcus said quietly. "Anything else?" "Yes. Find me the best private security firm in New York. Not the flashiest, not the most expensive. The best. People who actually know what they're doing." She thought of Ethan's tactical assessment, the way he'd read the situation before it even began, preferably with military backgrounds. Special operations, if possible. "On it." "Isabella?" Marcus hesitated at the door. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you're okay. When I saw the news yesterday, when they said there were casualties and I couldn't reach you," his voice caught. "I'm just glad you're okay." After he left, Isabella stood at her window and looked out at the city she'd conquered. 47 stories up, insulated by glass and steel and money, watching the world move below like pieces on a chessboard. This was what she'd wanted, wasn't it? To be above it all, untouchable, secure in her tower. But Ethan's words kept echoing in her mind. Walls don't just keep bad things out, they keep good things out too. Her phone buzzed with a text from Detective Morrison. "Need you to come down to the station. We have some information about yesterday's attack. Can you make it this afternoon?" Isabella confirmed and spent the next several hours forcing herself to focus on work, market analysis, investment portfolios, the 1,000 details that kept Meridian Capital running. But her concentration was fractured, her usual laser focus disrupted by intrusive thoughts of gunfire and blood and a mechanic's steady gray eyes. The police station was exactly as grim as she'd expected. Fluorescent lights that made everyone look half dead, linoleum floors that had seen too much tragedy, and the pervasive smell of bad coffee and human misery. Detective Morrison met her in the lobby, his expression serious. "Thanks for coming in, Ms. Sterling. This way." He led her to an interview room that was marginally less depressing than the hallway, gestured for her to sit, and placed a folder on the table between them. "We've identified the 3 suspects," he began without preamble. "Viktor Petrov, Dmitry Sokolov, and Alexei Volkov. All Russian nationals, all with connections to organized crime networks operating in New York." Isabella's analytical mind immediately started processing. Organized crime, so this was professional. Very professional. These weren't amateurs or opportunistic criminals. The cafe was surveilled for 3 days prior to the attack. They knew the layout, knew the security response times, had escape routes planned. Morrison opened the folder, showed her surveillance photos of the 3 men. What they didn't plan for was encountering someone with military training who'd fight back. Ethan. Mr. Carter's intervention disrupted their operation completely. According to the tactical analysis, they were planning to extract a specific target. The shooting only started when that plan fell apart. Isabella's blood turned cold. "Extract? You mean kidnap?" "That's our working theory." Morrison pulled out another photo, this time of Isabella herself, taken with a telephoto lens outside her office building. "We found this on Petrov's phone, along with your schedule, your home address, and detailed information about your security protocols. The room felt suddenly airless. Isabella stared at her own image, captured without her knowledge, studied like prey by predators who'd planned her abduction with military precision. "They were there for me," she said, her voice sounding distant to her own ears. "Not random, not coincidence. They came to take me." "Yes, and the evidence suggests this wasn't about ransom. The Russian networks don't typically target civilians for money. They have more efficient ways to make income. This was personal." Morrison leaned forward. "Matt Sterling, who wants you badly enough to hire professional kidnappers?" Isabella's mind raced through possibilities, calculating and discarding suspects with the same efficiency she applied to stock portfolios. "Could be anyone I've beaten in business. But hiring Russian organized crime? That's not typical corporate revenge. That's—" She trailed off, a memory surfacing. 6 months ago, during the Brennan Industries takeover, we discovered they were laundering money for offshore entities. I turned that information over to the SEC rather than using it as leverage. The investigation is still ongoing. Morrison's expression sharpened. "You exposed money laundering." "I exposed potential money laundering. We never confirmed the source of the funds." Isabella's voice steadied as she moved back into familiar analytical territory. "But if those offshore entities had connections to Russian networks, if they lost significant capital because of my disclosure, then they'd have motive for retaliation." Morrison made notes. "This is good. This gives us a direction to investigate. Do you have documentation of this?" "Everything's in the SEC filing. Marcus, my assistant, can provide copies." Isabella stared at the photo of herself again, feeling violation mixed with anger. How did I not see this coming? I run risk assessments constantly. How did I miss that I was being targeted? Because you were analyzing business risk, not physical security risk. Different threat models entirely. Morrison closed the folder. "Ms. Sterling, I'm going to be blunt. If our theory is correct, if you disrupted a significant money laundering operation, these people don't give up easily. The cafe attack failed, but that doesn't mean they won't try again. Hence the security recommendations. Hence the urgent security recommendations. You need professional protection, and you need it now. People who understand how criminal networks operate, who can anticipate and counter surveillance, who can keep me alive," Isabella finished. "I'm working on it. My assistant is vetting security firms today." "Good. In the meantime, I'd suggest varying your routine, avoiding predictable patterns, staying in public places as much as possible." Morrison stood. "We're going to do everything we can to track down whoever ordered this hit, but investigations take time. Promise me you'll be careful." Isabella left the police station feeling like the ground beneath her feet had turned to quicksand. Someone wanted to kidnap her. Professionals had been hired, surveillance conducted, plans made. And if Ethan hadn't been there, if he hadn't noticed something wrong, if he hadn't fought back, she'd be in a warehouse somewhere right now. Or worse. Her phone rang as she climbed into the car with her police escort. "Sarah." "Tell me you're somewhere safe," her friend said without greeting. Leaving the police station. "Sarah, they were targeting me specifically. The attack wasn't random." "I know. Detective Morrison called me for background information. Isabella, this is serious. You need to disappear for a while. Go to your place in the Hamptons, or better yet, leave the country. Switzerland, maybe, or—" "I'm not running." Isabella was surprised by the certainty in her own voice. "I've spent my entire life running, from vulnerability, from connection, from anything that couldn't be controlled through money and power. But running doesn't actually make you safe. It just makes you alone." "Since when do you care about being alone? That's always been your preferred state." "Since yesterday." Isabella watched Manhattan slide past the car windows. Millions of people living their lives, taking risks, being vulnerable, somehow surviving despite the complete absence of 47th floor towers. "Sarah, can I ask you something? When you set me up with Ethan, what were you really hoping would happen?" Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Honestly, I was hoping you'd remember how to be human. You've become so hard, Isabella, so isolated. I missed my friend, the one who used to laugh, who took chances, who believed in things beyond quarterly earnings reports. I thought maybe someone completely outside our world might help you find that person again. She might be dead. That version of me." Or maybe she's just been locked in a tower for 15 years, waiting for someone to remind her that the door was never actually locked. After they hung up, Isabella sat with those words. The door was never actually locked. She'd built her prison willingly, brick by brick, convinced that isolation meant safety. But yesterday had proven that safety was always an illusion. The only question was whether she'd spend her remaining time alone in comfort or risk connection and all its attendant dangers. Her phone buzzed with another text from Ethan. Just got home. Lily made a welcome back banner that's bigger than our apartment. If you're free this week, we'd really love to see you. No pressure, though. I know you're dealing with a lot. Isabella stared at the message, then made a decision that terrified her more than facing down armed gunmen. Change of plans, she told her driver. Red Hook. I need an address from my assistant. 20 minutes later, they pulled up outside a small garage with a hand-painted sign reading Carter Restorations. The building was brick, old but well-maintained, with a large roll-up door currently halfway open to reveal several motorcycles in various states of assembly. Music drifted out. Classic rock. Something with a guitar solo that Isabella didn't recognize. She climbed out of the car, suddenly aware that she was wearing a $3,000 suit to visit a garage in Red Hook. The police escort moved to follow her, but she held up a hand. I'll be fine. This is a friend. Ma'am, with respect, our orders are to keep me safe, I know. You can see me from here. I promise I won't go anywhere without telling you. When the officer still looked uncertain, Isabella softened slightly. Please, I need a few minutes of normal. He nodded reluctantly, and Isabella walked toward the garage. She could see someone working on a motorcycle near the back, tall, dark-haired, moving with careful precision despite the bandages visible under his worn t-shirt. You're supposed to be resting, she called out. Ethan looked up, and his face split into a genuine smile that made something warm unfold in Isabella's chest. I am resting. I'm just doing it while adjusting a carburetor. Very relaxing. That's not what rest means. It is in mechanic. He set down his tools and walked toward her, moving slower than usual, one hand unconsciously pressing against his bandaged side. You came. I wasn't sure if you would. I wasn't sure either, Isabella admitted. I should be at the office. There are 17 fires that need putting out, board members who think I'm a liability, and approximately 1 million decisions that can't be made without me. But I'm here instead. I'm glad. Ethan gestured to a small office space visible through a door at the garage's rear. Come on, I'll make coffee. Fair warning, though, it's nothing fancy, just regular coffee from a regular machine. Regular sounds perfect right now. The office was small but organized, desk covered in papers and parts catalogs, walls decorated with photos of restored vehicles, and what looked like military unit patches under glass. One corner held a child-sized desk with crayons and coloring books, evidence of Lily's presence in her father's workspace. Ethan poured coffee into mismatched mugs and handed her one. You look exhausted. Didn't sleep, kept seeing... Isabella stopped, unsure how to finish that sentence. Kept seeing you get shot? Kept reliving the worst moments of my life? Kept wondering who I'd be if I actually let myself care about people? Yeah, Ethan said softly. That's normal after something like yesterday. Took me months after my first serious firefight to sleep through the night. Eventually it gets better. I'm not sure I want it to get better. The words surprised Isabella as much as they apparently surprised Ethan, based on his expression. If I get used to this, if I let it become normal, doesn't that mean I've accepted that violence and trauma are just part of life? I've spent years building walls to prevent exactly that acceptance. But the walls didn't protect you, Ethan pointed out gently. They just made you alone when bad things happened anyway. Before Isabella could respond, the office door burst open and a small whirlwind exploded into the room. Lily Carter was 8 years old going on 80, with her father's dark hair pulled into a messy ponytail, bright green eyes that missed nothing, and a smile that could probably power a small city. She wore jeans, a t-shirt covered in dinosaurs, and the kind of fearless confidence that suggested no one had ever told her the world was anything but wonderful. Daddy, is this her? Is this the fire extinguisher lady? Lily's eyes were huge as she stared at Isabella. You're even prettier than in the news. Are you really a queen? The lady on TV called you the Ice Queen, but you don't look icy. You look warm. Well, maybe a little icy, but pretty icy, like Snow Princess icy, not mean icy. Am I talking too much? Daddy says I talk too much sometimes, but I can't help it because there's so much to say. And Lily, Ethan's voice carried gentle amusement. Breathe. Sorry. Lily took a dramatic breath, then extended her hand to Isabella with surprising formality. Hi, I'm Lily Carter. Thank you for saving my dad. He's pretty much my favorite person in the whole world, so I'm really glad you helped him not die. Isabella found herself shaking hands with an 8-year-old, completely at a loss for how to respond to this hurricane of enthusiasm wrapped in dinosaur clothing. I'm Isabella, and you're welcome, though your dad did most of the saving. That's what he said too, but I watched the video. Don't tell Daddy, he doesn't know I saw it, and you were really brave. The fire extinguisher thing was so cool, like a superhero, but with office equipment instead of superpowers. Can you teach me how to do that? Not in a real emergency, obviously, but like, just in case? Because Daddy says it's important to know how to protect yourself. And so, Lily Carter. Ethan's tone was firmer now. What did we talk about regarding boundaries and giving people space to talk? Lily's face fell slightly. That I should ask questions one at a time and wait for answers instead of talking like a machine gun. Exactly. Ethan ruffled her hair affectionately. Why don't you go finish your homework? I'll call you when it's time for dinner. But I want to talk to Isabella. She's interesting. More interesting than math homework, which is basically torture designed to make children suffer. Lily turned pleading eyes on Isabella. You don't want me to suffer, do you? Despite everything, the trauma, the exhaustion, the complete upheaval of her life, Isabella laughed, actually laughed, the sound surprising her with its genuineness. I survived math homework too. I promise you won't die. Fine, Lily sighed dramatically, but I have like 17 questions for you later, actually probably more like 47. Do you like dinosaurs? I really like dinosaurs, especially velociraptors because they're smart and work in packs. Daddy says I'm like a velociraptor sometimes, which I think is a compliment, even though he says it when I'm being stubborn. Are you stubborn? You seem like you might be stubborn. That's okay, though. Stubborn people get stuff done. Lily, homework, now. But Ethan was smiling, clearly accustomed to his daughter's verbal Olympics. Lily departed with visible reluctance, pausing at the door to stage whisper at Isabella. I'm really glad you're here. Daddy smiles more when you're around. He doesn't smile enough usually. Don't tell him I said that, though. Then she was gone, leaving a silence that felt simultaneously lighter and more complicated than before. Sorry about the interrogation, Ethan said, refilling their coffee. Lily's never met a stranger or an unasked question. She's wonderful. Isabella surprised herself by meaning it. Exhausting, but wonderful. Where does she get the energy? No idea. Certainly not from me. Ethan settled carefully into his desk chair. So what brings you to Red Hook, besides checking on your favorite wounded mechanic? Favorite implies I know multiple wounded mechanics. You're currently the only one in that category. Isabella wrapped her hands around the warm mug. I went to the police station this morning. They identified the men from yesterday, Russian organized crime. Ethan's expression shifted instantly. The same tactical awareness she'd seen in the cafe, the soldier replacing the mechanic in a heartbeat. They tell you why? Probably related to a money laundering operation I exposed 6 months ago. Morrison thinks they were planning to kidnap me, not kill me, extract me for leverage or revenge or... Her voice cracked slightly. If you hadn't been there, if you hadn't noticed something wrong... But I was there, and you're safe. Ethan reached across the desk, his hand covering hers. Isabella, you can't torture yourself with what-ifs. That way lies madness. The detective said they had surveillance photos of me. My schedule, my home address, detailed security information. They'd been watching me for days, planning this, and I had no idea. Isabella looked up at him. How did you know? In the cafe, how did you see it when I didn't? Training. Experience? A decade of learning to read threats before they materialize. Ethan's thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand. It's not a skill most people need, Isabella. Your brain is trained to spot financial threats, market manipulations, corporate backstabbing. Mine's trained to spot physical danger, different tools for different environments. I hired a security firm today, former special forces, like you suggested. They're doing a full threat assessment, implementing new protocols, basically turning my life into a protected zone. She laughed without humor. Turns out my tower wasn't secure at all, just expensive. Security isn't about walls, Ethan said quietly. It's about awareness, about having people who watch your back, about building a life where people care if something happens to you. I have employees who'd care. The board would definitely care. Can't have the CEO getting kidnapped, bad for stock prices. That's not what I mean, and you know it. Isabella did know it. She sat in this small, cluttered office in a garage in Red Hook, drinking mediocre coffee with a mechanic who'd taken a bullet for her and felt more secure than she'd ever felt in her 47th floor penthouse. Lily said you smile more when I'm around, she said, changing the subject because the weight of Ethan's perception was too much. Is that true? Ethan's smile confirmed it before his words did. Yeah, you're interesting, Isabella Sterling. You confuse me and challenge me and make me think about things I haven't thought about in years. That's worth smiling about. I confuse you? Constantly. You're brilliant and cold and incredibly competent, but underneath that there's someone who grabbed a fire extinguisher despite being terrified, someone who stayed at a hospital for 5 hours to check on a mechanic she barely knew, someone who drove to Red Hook in the middle of a workday instead of staying in her tower. He squeezed her hand gently. I can't figure out which one is the real you, or if maybe they both are. I don't know either, Isabella admitted. I thought I knew exactly who I was, what I wanted, what mattered, how the world worked. But yesterday broke all of that, and now I'm sitting here and I don't recognize my own life anymore. Maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe the life you had wasn't really living. Before Isabella could respond, raised voices erupted from the garage. Both she and Ethan stood, him wincing at the sharp movement, her instinctively moving toward the door. Ethan Carter? A woman's voice, sharp with distress. Please, someone said you were here. I need help. My daughter. They took my daughter. Isabella and Ethan emerged from the office to find a woman in her mid-40s standing in the garage entrance, disheveled and clearly distraught. She held a piece of paper in shaking hands, her eyes red from crying. Ma'am, I'm Ethan Carter. What's happened? Ethan's voice had shifted into that same calm command he'd used during the cafe shooting, instantly projecting authority and competence. My name is Natasha Volkov. The woman's accent was thick, Eastern European. My daughter Anya is missing, taken. The men who took her, one of them was my husband, ex-husband, Alexei Volkov. Isabella's blood turned to ice. Alexei Volkov, one of the men from yesterday's cafe shooting? Natasha's eyes widened as she registered Isabella's presence. You're the woman from the news, the CEO they were trying to take. Please, you must understand, my husband is a bad man, very bad. He works for terrible people, does terrible things. I left him 2 years ago, took Anya, tried to protect her, but now... Her voice broke. Now they have her. They say they will hurt her if I talk to police, if I tell anyone. But I heard about you, Mr. Carter, heard what you did yesterday, how you saved that little girl. Please, you have to help me save mine. Ethan exchanged a glance with Isabella, and she saw the same calculation happening behind his eyes that was running through her own mind. This was dangerous. This was way beyond anything they should be involved in. This was organized crime and kidnapping and exactly the kind of situation that got people killed. Mrs. Volkov, Ethan said gently, you need to go to the police. This is too dangerous for... The police will get her killed. These men, they have people everywhere. They know things before they happen. The only reason I came to you is because you're not police. Because you're just a mechanic who happened to be brave. Natasha thrust the paper at him. They sent this, instructions. They want money for her return, but I don't have that kind of money. Nobody I know has that kind of money, except... She turned to Isabella. No, Isabella said immediately. I'm not getting involved in a criminal ransom situation. That's insane. They have my little girl. Natasha's eyes filled with tears. She is 8 years old, same age as your daughter, Mr. Carter. She likes butterflies and drawing pictures and singing songs. And they have her because her father is a monster, and I was not strong enough to keep her safe. Please, I am begging you, both of you." Isabella looked at Ethan and saw in his expression the same conflict she felt. Every logical instinct screamed to walk away. Call the police. Let professionals handle this. But logic had never accounted for the image of an 8-year-old girl, same age as Lily, same age as Sophie, in the hands of the men who'd orchestrated yesterday's attack. "How much are they asking for?" Isabella heard herself say. Natasha named a figure that was substantial but not impossible, clearly calculated to be just within reach of desperate relatives liquidating assets. "And if the money is paid, they'll return Anya safely?" "They say yes, but I don't trust them. These men, they don't keep promises. I think they take the money and hurt her anyway, to punish me for leaving Alexei." Natasha's hands trembled. "I don't know what to do. I don't know where to turn. You're my only hope." Isabella's mind was already running calculations. The ransom amount was manageable. But Natasha was right. Criminal organizations didn't typically honor bargains with civilians. They'd take the money and eliminate witnesses, which meant any exchange would need tactical planning, backup, extraction protocols, which meant, "Ethan," she said quietly, "can I talk to you privately?" They stepped back into the office, closing the door on Natasha's desperate vigil. "You're thinking about doing this," Ethan said. Not a question. "I'm thinking that we have resources she doesn't. Money, connections, skills. I'm thinking that if we walk away, that little girl probably dies." Isabella met his eyes. "I'm also thinking that this is insane and dangerous and could get us all killed. So talk me out of it, please." "I can't." "Why not?" Ethan was quiet for a moment. "Because I'm thinking the same thing. Because yesterday, when Sophie was in danger, I didn't hesitate. Because I have a daughter Anya's age, and I can't imagine what Natasha's going through. Because sometimes doing the right thing means doing the dangerous thing." He paused. "But Isabella, this isn't just grabbing a fire extinguisher. This is taking on an organized crime network. If we do this, we need to do it smart. We need help." "What kind of help?" "The kind that understands tactical operations, hostage rescue, how criminal organizations think and operate." Ethan pulled out his phone. "I know some people. Guys I served with. They're not military anymore, but they've got the skills. And they owe me favors." "How many favors?" "Enough." His expression grew serious. "But we need more than muscle. We need intelligence, where they're holding her, how many hostels, exit routes. We need financial forensics to trace the organization's structure. We need exactly what I built Meridian Capital to provide," Isabella finished. "Analysis, strategy, resource allocation. I can trace their money, map their operations, identify vulnerabilities. But Ethan, if we do this, if we really commit to this, there's no going back. We'll have made ourselves targets. My board will lose their minds. Your life, Lily's life, will be at risk. Lily's already at risk living in a world where 8-year-olds get kidnapped because their fathers are criminals." Ethan moved to the window, staring out at the garage where Natasha waited. "I didn't get into this line of work, the military, I mean, because I wanted adventure or glory. I did it because I believe some things are worth fighting for, worth taking risks for. And kids? Kids are always worth it." Isabella thought about her tower, her carefully constructed life of control and isolation and absolute safety. She thought about Sophie's screams, about Lily's enthusiasm, about a little girl named Anya who liked butterflies and was terrified somewhere while her mother begged strangers for help. She thought about who she'd been yesterday morning, the ice queen who would have called the police and considered her duty discharged, and who she was becoming in the wake of violence and trauma, and a mechanic who kept asking her to be brave. "Okay," she said, "let's save her." Ethan turned back to her, something like respect warming his expression. "You're sure?" "Absolutely not. I'm terrified, and this is probably the worst decision I've ever made, and my board is going to have me committed. But I'm also completely certain that if we don't help, I'll never forgive myself. So yes, I'm sure." They returned to the garage together, standing side by side in front of Natasha's desperate hope. "We'll help you," Ethan said, "but we do this my way. Smart, careful, with proper planning and backup. No heroics, no cowboys." Agreed? Natasha nodded frantically. Yes, yes, anything. Thank you. Thank you so much. Don't thank us yet, Isabella said quietly. We haven't saved her. We've just agreed to try. As Natasha collapsed into grateful tears and Ethan started making phone calls to people with ominous-sounding call signs, Isabella stood in that Red Hook garage and realized something fundamental. The Ice Queen was melting. And what emerged from the thaw wasn't weakness or vulnerability or any of the things she'd feared. It was purpose. Real purpose. The kind that came from helping people rather than dominating them. The kind that made you feel alive instead of just successful. Her phone buzzed with increasingly frantic messages from Marcus about board meetings and investor calls and the 100 fires burning in her absence. Isabella silenced it and turned her full attention to the tactical planning session Ethan was orchestrating with military precision. For the first time in 15 years, Meridian Capital and its empire of money and power could wait. There was a little girl who needed saving, and Isabella Sterling had just discovered she was willing to risk everything to make that happen. The transformation of Carter Restorations from a quiet garage into a tactical operations center happened with startling speed. Within 2 hours, 3 men who looked like they'd been carved from granite in military discipline arrived in nondescript vehicles. Ethan introduced them with call signs rather than names. Bear, a massive man with gentle eyes who specialized in hostage extraction. Hawk, lean and watchful, whose expertise was surveillance and intelligence gathering. And Doc, who despite his medical nickname, carried himself like someone equally comfortable saving lives or ending them. They didn't question why a mechanic and a CEO were planning a rescue operation against Russian organized crime. Apparently when Ethan Carter called, you showed up and got to work. Tell me everything, Bear said to Natasha, his voice surprisingly soft for someone his size. When did they take her? What exactly did the ransom note say? Did you see who delivered it? Natasha recounted the story in fragments. Anya had been walking home from school, same route she took every day. 2 men in a black SUV. She'd screamed, tried to run, but they'd grabbed her. A neighbor witnessed it, but was too afraid to intervene. The ransom note appeared in Natasha's apartment that evening, slipped under her door while she was filing a missing person report she knew would go nowhere. They want the money delivered tomorrow night, Natasha said, her voice breaking. Pier 73, midnight. They say to come alone, no police, or Anya dies. Classic setup for an ambush, Hawk observed, studying the note with professional detachment. Isolated location, limited visibility, multiple escape routes via water. They're planning to take the money and eliminate the witness. And Anya? Isabella asked, though she dreaded the answer. Depends on whether she's more valuable alive or dead. If they think they can leverage her further, against her mother's testimony, against cooperating witnesses, they might keep her. If she's just a loose end. Hawk trailed off, but the implication hung heavy in the garage. Isabella felt sick. This was so far beyond anything she understood. Corporate warfare had rules, boundaries, legal frameworks. This was a world where 8-year-olds were commodities and human life was measured in tactical advantages. So we don't play their game, Ethan said firmly. We don't show up at their ambush site with money and hope. We find where they're holding her, we extract her, and we disappear before they know what happened. Easy to say, Doc commented dryly. Significantly harder to execute. We need intelligence. Where she is, how many hostiles, security measures. That takes time we don't have. Then we create the intelligence, Isabella heard herself say. All eyes turned to her. I can trace their money. Criminal organizations move cash constantly. Payoffs, bribes, operational expenses. They need infrastructure for that, and infrastructure leaves digital footprints. Bear raised an eyebrow. You're talking about hacking into criminal financial networks? I'm talking about using legitimate financial forensics tools to follow money trails. Meridian Capital has contracts with every major bank in New York. We monitor transactions for fraud detection and money laundering red flags. If this organization is operating in the city, they're using accounts I can access. Isabella pulled out her phone, already mentally cataloging resources. Give me their names. Any known associates, shell companies, properties. I'll find the money, and money always leads somewhere. That's illegal, Hawk pointed out. Multiple felonies, actually. Bank fraud, unauthorized access, violation of privacy laws. Only if we get caught. Isabella's smile was cold. And I didn't build a $7 billion empire by getting caught. Ethan studied her with an expression that mixed concern and something that might have been pride. Isabella, if you do this, you're crossing a line. There's no going back. I crossed that line when I grabbed a fire extinguisher and charged armed men. This is just a different kind of weapon. She met his eyes. I'm tired of building walls and counting money while the world burns. For once in my life, I want to use what I've built for something that actually matters. So either help me or get out of my way. The garage fell silent. Then Bear started laughing, a deep, rumbling sound that shook his massive frame. I like her. She's got steel. More like ice, Hawk murmured, but he was smiling too. All right, Ethan said. We do this together. Isabella handles the financial intelligence. Hawk sets up surveillance on known locations once we have targets. Bear and Doc start preparing extraction protocols. I'll coordinate and liaison with Natasha. He turned to the terrified mother. Mrs. Volkov, I need you to write down everything you know about your ex-husband, where he liked to operate, who his associates were, any properties or businesses he mentioned. Can you do that? Natasha nodded, relief and terror warring in her expression. Yes, anything. I will tell you everything. Good. We're going to need a base of operations, somewhere secure, off the grid. Ethan looked around his garage with regret. This won't work. Too exposed, too many civilians nearby. I have a place, Isabella said. My penthouse has a home office with secure communication lines and enough privacy that we won't be interrupted. It's also got security that makes Fort Knox look accessible. Your board-approved, corporate-monitored glass tower penthouse? Ethan's skepticism was evident. My privately owned, independently secured, nobody's business but mine penthouse. The office building is Meridian property. My apartment is mine alone. Isabella was already texting Marcus with instructions to clear her evening schedule. Meet me there in 2 hours. I'll send the address. She left them planning logistics and drove back to Manhattan with her police escort trailing behind, blissfully unaware that their protection detail was escorting someone actively planning to commit multiple federal crimes. The irony wasn't lost on Isabella. Her penthouse apartment occupied the entire top floor of a building in Tribeca, not her office tower, but a converted industrial space she'd purchased 7 years ago and renovated into cold, modern perfection. All white furniture and chrome accents and windows that showcased Manhattan like a museum exhibit. She'd designed it to be impressive and impersonal, a space where she could exist without the messiness of actual living. Looking at it now, Isabella saw it for what it was. Another tower, another wall, another way of keeping the world at a safe, sterilized distance. Well, that was about to change. She spent the next hour transforming her pristine dining room into a command center. The 12-foot table she'd never used for actual dining became a workspace. She set up her laptop, her tablet, and pulled files from her office server that technically required 14 levels of authorization to access. Then she started following the money. Alexei Volkov's name appeared in transaction records dating back 7 years, small amounts at first, then increasingly large sums moving through a network of shell companies registered in Delaware, Cyprus, and the Cayman Islands. Classic money laundering structure designed to obscure origin and destination. But whoever had set it up wasn't as clever as they thought. Isabella could see the patterns, the rhythmic movements that suggested automated transfers, the mathematical elegance that ultimately created predictability. She cross-referenced properties purchased through these shell companies, looking for locations that fit the profile for holding a hostage, isolated but accessible, secure but unremarkable. 3 addresses emerged as possibilities: a warehouse in Queens, a storage facility in the Bronx, and a residential property in Staten Island registered to a company called Volkov Imports. Too obvious, Isabella thought, staring at the last one. Criminal organizations didn't typically use their own names on illegal operations. Unless they wanted something to be found, wanted to draw attention to a decoy location while the real operation happened elsewhere. She dug deeper, following secondary connections, analyzing transaction timing, looking for anomalies. And there, a monthly payment to something called Riverside Storage Solutions that was always exactly $3,847. Not a round number, which meant it was probably real rent rather than a money laundering transfer. She pulled property records and found a small warehouse complex near the Brooklyn waterfront, registered to an LLC that, 17 layers deep, connected back to Volkov's network. That felt right. Waterfront access for fast escape, industrial area with low foot traffic, close enough to organize quickly, but far enough from typical criminal hotspots to avoid police attention. Isabella was still analyzing the location when her doorbell rang. She checked the security camera and saw Ethan, accompanied by his 3 military friends, waiting in her building's lobby. She buzzed them up, then stood in her pristine living room and tried to see it through their eyes. "Holy hell," Bear said when she opened the door. "This is an apartment?" "It's a monument to isolation and excess," Isabella replied. "But it has secure internet and no neighbors, so it'll serve our purposes. Come in." They filed past her, these men who specialized in violence and rescue, tracking their very different lives across her white carpet. Isabella found she didn't care about the carpet. She cared about the maps and files and intelligence she'd compiled. "I found her," she announced without preamble. "Or at least I found where I think they're holding her. Riverside Storage Solutions, Warehouse 7, Brooklyn Waterfront." Hawk immediately pulled up the location on his tablet, studying satellite imagery with professional intensity. Good sight lines, limited entry points, direct water access. If I were holding a hostage, this would make my short list. He glanced at Isabella with new respect. "How confident are you in this intelligence?" 80%. "The financial trail is solid, but I can't confirm occupancy without physical surveillance." Isabella pulled up her own analysis. "The property has been paying utilities at elevated levels for the past 6 months, consistent with someone actually using the space rather than just maintaining it. There's also a pattern of late-night deliveries from a catering company that specializes in feeding construction crews. Why would an empty warehouse need regular food delivery?" "You got all this in 2 hours?" Doc looked genuinely impressed. "I got this in 90 minutes. I spent the other 30 ordering us dinner. You can't plan a hostage rescue on empty stomachs." Isabella gestured to her kitchen, where several bags of Thai food were waiting. "Eat. We have work to do." They ate standing around her dining room table, which was now covered in maps and equipment and the detritus of tactical planning. Isabella found herself standing next to Ethan, their shoulders occasionally brushing as they studied Hawk's surveillance recommendations. "You're really good at this," Ethan said quietly. "The analysis, the strategic thinking. It's like watching you run a hostile takeover, except the target is criminal infrastructure instead of a company." "The principles are the same," Isabella replied. "Identify the target's vulnerabilities, allocate resources efficiently, execute with precision, minimize collateral damage. I've just never applied those principles to something that actually mattered before." "Your business matters." "Does it?" "I've spent 15 years making rich people richer, moving numbers around spreadsheets, destroying careers and calling it strategy. Yesterday, when those guns were pointed at me, I realized that none of it, not $1 of my $7 billion, could save me. Or that little girl, or anyone." She looked up at him. "You saved us. With nothing but training and courage and the willingness to risk yourself for strangers. What have I ever built that's worth that?" "You're building it now," Ethan said. "Every choice you've made since yesterday, staying at the hospital, coming to my shop, helping Natasha, using your skills to find Anya, that's building something that matters. You're building a life instead of just an empire." Before Isabella could respond, Hawk called them over to review the surveillance plan. He'd be doing a reconnaissance run that night, using night vision and thermal imaging to confirm occupancy and count hostiles. Bear and Doc would stage extraction equipment at a secondary location. Ethan would coordinate timing and communication, and Isabella would continue tracking the organization's financial movements, looking for any changes that might indicate they'd discovered the rescue attempt. "One more thing," Hawk said, his expression grave. "We need to discuss what happens if this goes wrong. If we walk into that warehouse and it's a trap, or if they've moved her, or if they've already—" He stopped, unwilling to finish that sentence in front of Natasha, who'd been sitting quietly in the corner, watching everything with desperate hope. "We need a contingency," Ethan agreed. "If the extraction fails, we disappear. No heroics, no last stands. We scatter and regroup." "What about Anya?" Natasha's voice was barely audible. If you cannot save her, what happens to my daughter? The question hung in the air, terrible and unanswerable. Isabella looked around at these men who'd seen combat, who'd faced impossible situations, and saw the same calculation in their eyes that she felt in her own heart. The odds weren't great. The intelligence wasn't certain. The risk of failure and the consequences of that failure were enormous. "We're not going to fail," Isabella said, with more confidence than she felt. "We're going to find your daughter, extract her safely, and make sure the people who took her face justice. That's not optimism. That's a commitment." Bear smiled slightly. Now she sounds like a commanding officer, all certainty and no room for doubt. "Fake it till you make it," Isabella replied. "Isn't that the secret to everything?" They worked through the night, refining plans and contingencies and backup contingencies. Lily appeared at one point, delivered by a neighbor who had no idea what was actually happening, and immediately attached herself to Isabella with the determined focus of an 8-year-old who'd decided someone was interesting. "Are you planning something secret?" Lily whispered, eyeing the maps and equipment with barely contained excitement. "Because this looks like movie stuff, like spy stuff. Are you guys spies? Is my dad a spy?" That would explain so much about why he's so weird about locks and always sits facing the door and— "Lily," Ethan interrupted gently, "how about you go watch a movie in the guest room? The adults need to finish some boring work stuff." Boring work stuff doesn't involve maps and people called Hawk and Bear. But Lily allowed herself to be redirected, not before stage whispering to Isabella. "Whatever you're doing, be careful. My dad's really important to me, and you seem important to him, so you're both important to me by default. That's transitive property. We learned about it in math." After Lily was safely ensconced in the guest room with a tablet and headphones, the planning continued. Hawk left at midnight to begin his reconnaissance, armed with equipment that looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie. The rest of them tried to rest. Doc and Bear taking turns sleeping on Isabella's couch, Ethan sitting at the dining room table reviewing extraction protocols, Natasha staring out the window at a city that held her daughter somewhere in its vast darkness. Isabella found she couldn't sleep either. She stood at her own window, looking out at the same view she'd looked at 1,000 times before, and saw it completely differently. All those lights, all those windows, each one a life being lived, a story unfolding, people facing their own crises and triumphs, and ordinary moments of existence. She'd spent so long above it all, isolated in her tower, that she'd forgotten what it meant to be part of the messy, complicated, beautiful chaos of actual human connection. "You should rest," Ethan said, appearing beside her. "Tomorrow's going to be intense." "I don't think I could sleep if I tried. My mind keeps running scenarios, calculating probabilities of success." Isabella glanced at him. "You should rest too. You were shot yesterday. Your body needs recovery time." "I've operated on worse." Ethan leaned against the window frame. "Iraq, 2008. Took shrapnel in my leg during an extraction operation. Still had to carry a wounded teammate 3 miles through hostile territory before we reached the extraction point. Compared to that, this is easy." "You almost died." "It wasn't a question. Several times. Turns out I'm hard to kill." His smile was slight but genuine. "The human body can endure amazing things when properly motivated. And saving people? That's always been my motivation." "Why did you leave? The military, I mean. You were clearly good at it." Ethan was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. "I loved the work. Loved my team, loved the mission, loved feeling like what I did mattered. But Sarah, my wife, got sick. Stage 4 cancer, aggressive and fast-moving. The Army gave me compassionate leave, but it wasn't enough. She needed me. Lily needed me. And I realized that I'd spent years saving strangers while taking my own family for granted." His voice grew rough. "Sarah died 6 months after diagnosis. 6 months. And I'd spent 5 of those months deployed because I convinced myself the mission was more important. By the time I got home permanently, she was already gone." "Ethan, I'm so sorry." "Me too. But it taught me something important. You can't get time back. Can't prioritize the wrong things and expect a second chance. So I got out, found work that let me be present for Lily, and promised myself I'd never again sacrifice what actually mattered for what seemed important." He looked at Isabella. "That's why I intervened yesterday. Not because I'm a hero, but because I've learned that when you have the ability to help and you choose not to, you have to live with that choice forever. And I've got enough regrets already. Isabella felt something crack open in her chest. Not breaking, but opening, like a door she'd kept locked finally giving way. I've spent 15 years prioritizing the wrong things, building empires instead of relationships, collecting money instead of memories. I thought I was being strong, being independent, being successful, but really, I was just being afraid. Afraid of what? Of being like my parents. My father lost everything when I was 9. Hostile takeover, bankruptcy, complete financial collapse. I watched it destroy him, watched my mother's hands shake as she sold her jewelry to buy groceries, watched us lose our house, our security, our entire identity. And I promised myself it would never happen to me. I'd never be vulnerable, never be dependent, never be weak. Isabella's voice wavered. So I built walls and climbed towers and accumulated enough money that I'd never have to feel that helpless again. But yesterday proved that money doesn't actually protect you from anything real. It's just an elaborate fantasy of control. So what are you going to do about it? Ethan's question was gentle but direct. I'm going to help save a little girl, and then I'm going to figure out what kind of person I actually want to be instead of just reacting to childhood trauma with increasingly expensive coping mechanisms. Isabella turned to face him fully. Thank you. For what? For seeing past the ice. For treating me like I was worth saving even when I was terrible to you. For showing me that strength isn't about walls and distance. It's about showing up for people even when it's terrifying. She hesitated, then added quietly, for making me want to be brave. Ethan's hand found hers in the darkness. You're already brave, Isabella. You just needed a reason to believe it. They stood like that for a while, hands linked, looking out at the city. And for the first time since she'd moved into this penthouse, Isabella didn't feel alone in her tower. She felt connected to this man, to the mission they'd undertaken, to the possibility that her life could be about more than just winning. Hawk returned at 4 a.m. with confirmation that made everyone's pulse spike. Thermal imaging showed 3 heat signatures in Warehouse 7, 2 adult-sized, 1 significantly smaller. Anya was there. The warehouse had minimal security, 2 men visible on rotation, no electronic surveillance systems beyond basic locks. It was almost too easy, which made everyone nervous. Could be a trap, Bear observed. Minimal security on a hostage site? Either they're incompetent or they want someone to try a rescue. Or they're arrogant, Isabella countered. They think Natasha is just a terrified mother with no resources. They don't expect military-grade opposition. She pulled up financial records. I've been tracking their communications, specifically large data transfers that might indicate planning or coordination. There's been nothing unusual in the past 12 hours, no sudden changes to their operational patterns. I think they genuinely believe they're in control. Arrogance is a tactical advantage, Ethan said. We use it. Hit them fast and hard before they realize they're under attack. He turned to Bear and Doc. Standard extraction protocol. I'll take point. Bear on cover. Doc on exit security. Hawk, you're overwatch with the van ready for immediate departure. And me? Isabella asked. You stay here with Natasha and Lily. This is the dangerous part, and you're not trained for... No. Isabella's voice was absolute. I'm not staying behind while you risk your lives for something I helped plan. I'm coming. Isabella, this isn't a boardroom negotiation. This is armed men who will shoot to kill. I know. I was there yesterday, remember? I know exactly what armed men willing to kill look like, and I'm still coming. She met his eyes with the same steel she'd used to dominate Wall Street. You can spend time arguing with me, or you can spend time teaching me what to do. Your choice. Ethan looked like he wanted to argue further, but Bear laughed and clapped him on the shoulder. You're not going to win this, brother. I recognize that expression. That's the face of someone who's made up their mind. Fine, Ethan said, though he didn't look happy about it. But you follow orders exactly. No improvisation, no heroics. If I say run, you run. If I say hide, you hide. If I say jump off a bridge, you ask how high on the way down. Clear? Crystal. Isabella felt adrenaline and terror mixing in her bloodstream. When do we move? Tomorrow night. They're expecting a midnight ransom exchange. We'll hit them at 11 while they're still preparing before they're fully alert. Ethan's expression was grim. Get some rest. All of you. We're going to need it. Rest proved impossible, but Isabella tried. She lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of hardened warriors preparing for combat in her dining room. Somewhere in this city, an 8-year-old girl was terrified and alone. Somewhere, her mother was counting the hours until she might lose everything. Somewhere, armed men were planning violence. And Isabella Sterling, who'd spent 15 years insulated from all of it, was about to walk directly into danger by choice. The next day passed in a blur of preparation. Isabella went to her office just long enough to show her face and assure Marcus she was alive. The board sent increasingly frantic messages about security protocols and risk assessments that she ignored. Her usual schedule, meetings, calls, decisions, continued without her, and she discovered that Meridian Capital functioned perfectly well in her absence. Either her systems were that good, or her presence wasn't as essential as she'd believed. She suspected it was a combination of both, and that realization was simultaneously liberating and terrifying. She returned to her penthouse to find it transformed into something between a military base and a daycare center. Lily had apparently decided that everyone needed artwork to inspire them, so there were crayon drawings taped to the walls, warriors fighting dragons, princesses being rescued, and one particularly ambitious piece labeled Isabella the Brave that showed a stick figure with very tall hair wielding what appeared to be a fire extinguisher against bad guys. "She's very taken with you," Natasha said, appearing beside Isabella as she studied the artwork. "Lily, she talks about you constantly. Says you're like a superhero but in a suit." "I'm not a superhero. I'm just someone who's finally trying to do the right thing." "That is what superheroes are," Natasha said simply. "Regular people who choose to help when they could choose safety instead." She touched Isabella's arm. "Thank you. For everything. For believing me. For risking yourself. For giving me hope." "Thank me when we have Anya back safely," Isabella replied. But she squeezed Natasha's hand, acknowledging the gratitude even as she feared she couldn't live up to it. The hours crawled toward 11. Ethan provided Isabella with a bulletproof vest that was simultaneously heavier and less protective feeling than she'd expected. He showed her how to move quietly, how to breathe to control fear, how to follow hand signals. Doc gave her a crash course in field medicine, just the basics, how to apply pressure to wounds, how to stabilize someone for transport. Bear taught her his favorite prayer, the one he used before every operation. "God grant me the courage to do what's necessary, the wisdom to know when to stop, and the luck to survive my own stubbornness." Isabella found herself repeating it silently as they prepared to leave. They took 2 vehicles, Hawk driving the van with extraction equipment, Ethan driving a nondescript sedan with Isabella, Bear, and Doc. Lily stayed behind with Natasha, both of them watching from the window as the makeshift rescue team departed into the New York night. The drive to Brooklyn felt eternal and instantaneous simultaneously. Isabella watched the city slide past, her city, the place she'd conquered financially but never really known. They passed through neighborhoods she'd never visited, past lives she'd never imagined, until finally they arrived at the waterfront where warehouses loomed against the dark sky. "Final check," Ethan said, his voice taking on that command quality she'd first heard in the cafe. "Bear, you're on cover. Doc, secure the exit and watch for additional hostiles. Hawk, your overwatch and rapid extraction. Isabella, you stay with me. Your job is simple. When we find Anya, you take her and get her to Hawk's position. Don't stop, don't hesitate. Just run. Everyone clear?" A chorus of affirmatives. Isabella added her own, though her voice shook slightly. They approached Warehouse 7 with tactical precision, moving through shadows like ghosts. Isabella tried to remember everything Ethan had taught her: quiet steps, controlled breathing, awareness of her position relative to cover. Her heart hammered so hard she was certain everyone could hear it, but she kept moving forward. Bear disabled the exterior lock with tools that looked like they belonged in a spy movie. The door swung open silently. Someone had oiled the hinges recently, which suggested regular use. Good sign. Meant the intelligence was solid. Inside, the warehouse was dimly lit by emergency lighting, casting everything in sickly yellow. Industrial equipment created shadows and blind spots, perfect for ambush, terrible for navigation. Ethan moved forward with his weapon raised, each step measured and purposeful. Isabella followed, feeling absurdly aware of her own mortality. They cleared the first section, empty except for storage containers. The second section revealed evidence of occupation, folding chairs, food wrappers, a portable generator humming quietly, and voices, speaking Russian in harsh whispers from somewhere deeper in the structure. Ethan signaled for silence, then pointed upward, a mezzanine level, accessible by metal stairs where light leaked from under a door. The voices were coming from up there. And if the voices were there, Anya probably was too. They ascended with agonizing slowness, each step a potential betrayal of noise. Isabella's entire world narrowed to the space between her and Ethan's back, to the rhythm of her breathing, to the prayer Bear had taught her running on repeat through her mind. At the top, Ethan paused at the door, listened. Then he looked back at Bear and Doc and gave a series of hand signals that Isabella didn't understand, but that made both men nod with grim certainty. Then everything happened at once. Ethan kicked the door open with explosive force. Bear was through in a heartbeat, weapon trained on the two men inside who were scrambling to react, shouting, in Russian, in English, commands to drop weapons and get down. One of the men complied immediately, hands raised. The other reached for a gun and Doc was there, disarming him with brutal efficiency. And in the corner, huddled against the wall with duct tape over her mouth and terror in her eyes, was a little girl with dark hair and her mother's features. "Anya," Isabella breathed. "Go," Ethan commanded. "Get her and go." Isabella ran to the child, her hands shaking as she carefully removed the duct tape. "It's okay, sweetheart. Your mom sent us. We're taking you home." Anya stared at her with huge, disbelieving eyes. Then she burst into tears and threw her arms around Isabella's neck with desperate strength. "I've got you," Isabella whispered, lifting the girl even though her muscles protested. "I've got you, and you're safe now." She turned to run for the door and saw Ethan standing with his weapon still raised, scanning for additional threats. Their eyes met across the room, and something passed between them. Acknowledgement, relief, shared triumph. Then Ethan's expression changed. Horror flooded his features as he looked past Isabella toward the door they'd entered through. "Behind you!" he shouted. Isabella turned and saw a third man emerging from a concealed space behind some equipment. He had a weapon raised and pointed directly at her and Anya. Time seemed to slow. Isabella saw the man's finger tightening on the trigger, heard Ethan shouting, felt Anya's weight in her arms, and knew with absolute clarity that she couldn't dodge, couldn't protect them both, couldn't do anything except be a shield for this terrified child. Then Ethan was there, moving with impossible speed, his body slamming into Isabella and Anya and driving them sideways just as the gun fired. They hit the ground in a tangle of limbs, Isabella's head cracking against concrete, Anya's scream piercing through the ringing in her ears. More gunfire, shouting, the sound of bodies hitting the floor, then silence, heavy and terrible. "Everyone okay?" Bear's voice, tight with tension. "Sound off." "Clear," Doc called. "Both hostiles secured." "Hawk, we need immediate extraction," Ethan said into his radio. "We're coming out hot." Then he looked down at Isabella, who was still on the floor with Anya clutched to her chest. "You hit?" "No, bruised, but not hit." Isabella checked Anya frantically. "Are you hurt? Baby, are you hurt?" Anya shook her head, sobbing too hard to speak but apparently physically unharmed. "Then we move. Now." Ethan hauled Isabella to her feet with one hand, steadying her when she swayed. "Can you run?" "Yes." "Then run." They fled down those metal stairs through the warehouse, out into the night where Hawk waited with the van's engine running. Isabella dove inside with Anya still in her arms, the others piling in behind her. Then they were moving, tires squealing, leaving Warehouse 7 and its subdued hostiles behind for the police to find via the anonymous tip Hawk was already phoning in. No one spoke during the drive back. Isabella held Anya, who'd gone from sobbing to silent shock, and tried to process what had just happened. They'd done it. Actually done it. Extracted a child from armed criminals and gotten out alive. It seemed impossible, like something from a movie rather than her actual life. When they arrived back at Isabella's penthouse, Natasha was waiting at the door. She saw her daughter and collapsed, weeping, as Anya finally broke free from Isabella's arms and ran to her mother with a cry that held every ounce of fear and relief and love in the world. "My baby," Natasha sobbed, holding Anya like she'd never let go again. "My beautiful baby, you're safe. You're safe now." Isabella watched them reunite and felt something in her chest expand painfully. This was what mattered, not deals or dollars or board approvals. This moment, this reunion, this proof that sometimes people did the right thing simply because it was right. "You did good," Ethan said quietly, appearing beside her. "Really good." "We did good," Isabella corrected, "all of us." But the victory felt hollow somehow, because she'd seen Ethan's face when that gun was pointed at her, seen him throw himself into danger without hesitation. And she realized with startling clarity that somewhere between the cafe shooting and this warehouse raid, between coffee conversations and tactical planning, something had fundamentally changed. She cared about this man, deeply, in ways that terrified her more than armed criminals ever could. Before she could examine that thought further, her phone exploded with notifications, 20 missed calls, 50 texts, and one email from Richard Brennan with the subject line, "Emergency board meeting demanded." Reality was calling, and Isabella Sterling, who just committed multiple felonies to rescue a kidnapped child, had to figure out how to explain to her board why their CEO had vanished for 2 days to play vigilante. She looked at Ethan, at Bear and Doc and Hawk, at Natasha and Anya wrapped in each other's arms, at Lily appearing sleepily from the guest room demanding to know if everyone was okay. Then she looked at her phone and the waiting judgment of her carefully constructed empire. And for the first time in her life, Isabella knew exactly which one mattered more. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 8 the following morning, which gave Isabella exactly 4 hours to sleep, shower, and prepare for what would likely be either her finest moment or complete professional destruction. She chose the latter time frame wisely, forgoing sleep entirely in favor of building the most important presentation of her career. Natasha and Anya had left around 3 in the morning, escorted by Hawk to a safe house he maintained for exactly these kinds of situations. The mother and daughter would stay hidden until the police finished processing the warehouse arrest and determining whether additional threats existed. Bear and Doc had departed shortly after, melting back into whatever lives they lived when not rescuing kidnapped children. That left Ethan, who'd refused to leave despite Isabella's insistence that he needed rest. He sat at her dining room table, still covered in tactical maps and equipment, drinking coffee and watching her work with that steady, assessing gaze that had become familiar over the past 3 days. "You're going to tell them the truth," he said. Not a question. All of it. Isabella didn't look up from her laptop, where she was compiling evidence with the same meticulous precision she'd once used to destroy competitors. The cafe shooting, the kidnapping, our investigation and rescue operation, every single detail, including the multiple felonies I committed accessing financial records without authorization. "They'll crucify you." "Probably." Isabella's smile was sharp. "But they'll have to do it publicly, which means the story gets out. And the story is that their CEO used her resources to save a kidnapped child. That's going to be very hard to spin as villainous, regardless of the legal technicalities." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "You're weaponizing public opinion against your own board." "I'm ensuring they understand the cost of removing me exceeds the cost of supporting me. It's basic risk assessment." She finally looked up at him. "You think I'm being calculating. I think you're being brilliant, also terrifying, possibly both simultaneously." He stood and walked to where she sat, placing his hands on her shoulders with gentle pressure. "But I also think you're exhausted and running on adrenaline and need to sleep before you face 12 people who want your head on a pike." "I can't sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I see that gun pointed at Anya. See your face when you realized we were in danger. See," Isabella's voice caught, "see you throwing yourself between us and that bullet, again. Why do you keep doing that?" "Doing what?" "Risking yourself for me, for strangers, for people who don't deserve that kind of sacrifice." She turned in her chair to face him. "You could have been killed yesterday. That man had a clear shot and you didn't even hesitate." "No," Ethan agreed quietly. "I didn't." "Why?" He crouched down so they were eye level, his hands moving from her shoulders to frame her face with surprising gentleness. Because in the 3 days I've known you, Isabella Sterling, you've become someone I can't imagine the world without. Because you're brilliant and brave and fighting so hard to become someone you're proud of. Because when I look at you, I see someone worth protecting, worth believing in, worth... He stopped, seeming to reconsider his words. Worth everything. Isabella felt her carefully constructed composure crack completely. That's insane. You barely know me. 3 days ago, I was terrible to you, called you just a mechanic, like that was something shameful. Dismissed everything you said because you didn't fit into my narrow definition of valuable. People change. You're changing. I'm watching it happen in real time, and it's extraordinary. Ethan's thumb traced her cheekbone gently. Besides, I'm kind of an expert in becoming someone new. I've been a soldier, a husband, a widower, a single dad, a mechanic. None of those versions of me stayed static. We're all constantly evolving, constantly choosing who we want to be. You're just doing it more dramatically than most. I don't know who I want to be, Isabella admitted, the words barely above a whisper. I only know who I don't want to be anymore. That's a start, Ethan smiled. And for what it's worth, I like all the versions of you I've met so far. The ice queen who built an empire, the terrified woman who grabbed a fire extinguisher anyway, the financial genius who found a kidnapped child, the person who held Anya and promised she was safe. You contain multitudes, Isabella. That's not weakness. That's being human. She wanted to kiss him. The realization hit with startling clarity. She wanted to close the distance between them and see if this connection they'd forged through trauma and danger translated into something more. But that felt like taking advantage, like confusing adrenaline and gratitude with genuine emotion. So instead, she just let herself lean into his touch for a moment, accepting comfort she'd spent years refusing. You should go home, she said finally. Get some sleep. Check on Lily. She's probably wondering where her father is. Lily's with her godmother, who knows I sometimes disappear for good reasons. She's fine. But Ethan stood anyway, giving Isabella space. I'll go if you promise to get at least 2 hours of sleep before your meeting. You can't fight a board on willpower alone. Watch me. Isabella, fine, 2 hours. I'll set an alarm. She watched him gather his things, feeling the apartment grow colder with his impending departure. Ethan, thank you for everything. For saving my life multiple times, for helping Anya, for making me believe I could be someone different. You don't need to thank me for seeing what was already there. He paused at the door. Call me after the meeting? I want to know how it goes. It's going to be a massacre. Then I definitely want to hear about it. His smile was warm despite the concern in his eyes. Good luck, Isabella. Though something tells me you won't need it. After he left, Isabella forced herself to lie down for exactly 2 hours. She didn't sleep. Her mind was too active, too full of presentations and arguments and potential outcomes. But she rested, which was something. Then she showered, dressed in her most expensive suit like armor, and prepared for war. Marcus met her in the lobby of Meridian Capital at 7:30, looking like he hadn't slept in days. Please tell me you have a plan, he said without preamble. Because the board is calling for your resignation. Brennan's leading the charge, claiming you've become a liability, and that your recent behavior demonstrates instability and poor judgment. Richard Brennan can choke on his own vendetta, Isabella replied calmly. I have a plan. It's risky and potentially career-ending, but it's a plan. That's not reassuring. It's not meant to be. She stepped into the elevator, Marcus scrambling to follow. How many board members are on Brennan's side? At least 7. Margaret Chen and 3 others are undecided. The remaining 2 seem inclined to support you, but they're waiting to hear your explanation before committing. Marcus pulled up his tablet. Also, the media coverage of the warehouse rescue went live an hour ago. Anonymous tip led police to 2 armed suspects and evidence of kidnapping. They're connecting it to the cafe shooting, speculating about organized crime networks. Your name hasn't been mentioned yet, but it will be. Isabella watched the floor numbers climb. Good. That actually helps. How does any of this help? You'll see. The elevator doors opened on the 47th floor. Trust me, Marcus. One last time. Trust me. The conference room felt like a courtroom. with 12 board members seated in judgment and Isabella standing at the head of the table like a defendant. Richard Brennan wore an expression of barely concealed triumph. Margaret Chen looked worried. The others ranged from hostile to neutral, none of them friendly. "Ms. Sterling," Brennan began without preamble, "for the past 3 days you've been essentially unreachable. You've missed critical meetings, ignored investor calls, and vanished during a major crisis involving threats to your personal safety. The board demands an explanation, and you'll get one." Isabella connected her laptop to the conference room display. "But first, I need to provide context. 3 days ago, I survived a hostage situation at a Manhattan cafe. The police have since confirmed that attack was targeted specifically at me, likely retaliation for my role in exposing money laundering operations during the Brennan Industries acquisition." Several board members shifted uncomfortably. Brennan's face reddened, but he said nothing. "That same evening, I was approached by a woman whose daughter had been kidnapped by the same criminal organization that orchestrated the cafe attack. She begged for help, knowing the police couldn't act without endangering her child. I had a choice: ignore her and return to my comfortable tower, or use the resources and expertise at my disposal to help." Isabella pulled up the first slide, financial transaction data meticulously documented. "I chose to help. In doing so, I accessed banking records without proper authorization, traced money laundering networks across multiple jurisdictions, and identified the location where an 8-year-old girl was being held hostage." "You committed financial crimes," Brennan interrupted. "Violated privacy laws, banking regulations, probably a dozen federal statutes. You're admitting to this in front of the entire board?" "I'm admitting that I prioritized a child's life over legal technicalities, yes." Isabella advanced to the next slide. Satellite imagery of Warehouse 7. "I then coordinated with security professionals to extract that child from armed criminals. The operation was successful. The child was returned safely to her mother. The criminals were apprehended by police based on anonymous information. No one was killed, though several people, including myself, came close." The room was silent. Margaret Chen looked stunned. Even Brennan seemed momentarily at a loss for words. "You led a rescue operation," Margaret said slowly. "You, personally, participated in extracting a hostage from armed criminals. With professional help, yes. I'm not claiming to be Rambo, but I used my analytical skills to find her, my financial resources to fund the operation, and my willingness to take risks to ensure a terrified child got to go home." Isabella met each board member's eyes in turn. "I broke laws. I endangered myself. I disappeared for 3 days without properly notifying you. All of that is true, but I also saved a life. And if you think I'm going to apologize for that, you've fundamentally misunderstood who I am." "This is insanity," Brennan burst out. "You're the CEO of a $7 billion company, not some vigilante. Your responsibility is to Meridian Capital, to our investors, to what?" Isabella's voice could have cut steel. "To quarterly profits, to stock prices, to making rich people richer while children are kidnapped and murdered. That's what you think my responsibility is. That's what we pay you for. Then maybe you're paying for the wrong things." Isabella pulled up her final slide. News coverage of the warehouse rescue, complete with quotes from police praising the anonymous heroes who'd saved Anya. "This story is going public, today. I've already given an exclusive interview to the Times detailing Meridian Capital's role in financial forensics that led to the rescue. I'm framing it as corporate social responsibility, using our expertise to fight organized crime and human trafficking." "You can't do that without board approval," one of the other members objected. "I can and I have. The article runs in tomorrow's edition." Isabella smiled without warmth. "Here's what's going to happen. You can fire me for my actions, which will require you to publicly explain that you're removing a CEO who saved a kidnapped child. The media will have a field day. Our stock will plummet. Our reputation will be permanently damaged. Or," she paused for effect, "you can support me. We can lean into this new direction. Transform Meridian Capital from just another investment firm into something that actually matters. Use our financial forensics capabilities to assist law enforcement in tracking criminal enterprises. Establish a division dedicated to fighting money laundering and human trafficking." "That's not our business model," Brennan said flatly. Then we change the business model. We evolve or we become irrelevant. Isabella leaned forward. The world is changing. Corporate social responsibility isn't just good PR anymore. It's expected, demanded. Companies that only care about profit are being left behind. But companies that demonstrate genuine commitment to making the world better, they're thriving. They're attracting the best talent, the most loyal customers, the investors who understand that long-term value comes from purpose, not just profit. Margaret Chen was nodding slowly. You want to turn us into a force for good while maintaining profitability. I want to prove they're not mutually exclusive, that we can build wealth and fight evil simultaneously, that success and significance can coexist. Isabella stood straight. I'm not apologizing for saving that child. I'm not apologizing for using our resources to do something meaningful. If that makes me unsuitable as CEO, then vote me out. But know that I'm not going quietly. I'm not slinking away. And the story of why Meridian Capital fired the woman who rescued a kidnapped child will follow this company forever. The silence that followed was profound. Isabella watched calculations happen behind 12 sets of eyes: risk assessment, public relations impact, potential outcomes. She'd given them a choice, but she'd also made one choice significantly more appealing than the other. Finally, Margaret Chen spoke. I move that we table the question of Ms. Sterling's resignation pending a full investigation of the incident and its implications. Furthermore, I move that we establish a task force to explore the feasibility of the corporate social responsibility initiative she's outlined. I second, another board member said quickly. Brennan looked like he'd swallowed something toxic. This is ridiculous. She broke the law. For which she may face legal consequences, Margaret replied coolly. But that's between her and the justice system. Our question is whether her actions benefit or harm this company, and I'm increasingly convinced they benefit us, both financially and reputationally. The vote was closer than Isabella would have liked, 7-5 in favor of tabling the resignation question. But it was enough. She'd survived, for now. After the meeting dissolved, Margaret pulled Isabella aside. That was either the most brilliant move I've ever witnessed or the most catastrophically reckless. I genuinely can't tell which. Neither can I, Isabella admitted. But I meant every word. I'm tired of building empires that don't mean anything. If we're going to have this much money and power, we should use it for something besides making ourselves richer. You've changed. Margaret studied her. 3 days ago, you would have laughed at that sentiment, called it naive corporate idealism. 3 days ago, I hadn't been held hostage or saved a child's life or learned that everything I thought mattered was actually just expensive distraction from being terrified of vulnerability. Isabella smiled tiredly. Turns out getting shot at provides excellent perspective on what's actually important. The cafe shooting, that mechanic who saved you, Ethan Carter, he's involved in this somehow, isn't he? He coordinated the rescue operation, put together the team, planned the extraction, risked his life to save a child he'd never met. Isabella's voice softened. He's remarkable. Makes me want to be better than I am. Margaret's smile was knowing. That's how you know it's real, when someone makes you want to be your best self rather than just your most successful self. She squeezed Isabella's arm. Be careful, Isabella. You're playing with forces you don't fully understand, both the criminal kind and the emotional kind. Both can destroy you if you're not prepared. I'm not prepared, Isabella said honestly. But I'm doing it anyway. That's called growth, right? That's called being human. Welcome back to the species. Isabella left Meridian Capital feeling simultaneously triumphant and terrified. She'd survived the board meeting, but the consequences of her actions were far from resolved. The legal implications alone could be devastating. Accessing financial records without authorization was serious business. Multiple felonies that could result in prison time if prosecutors decided to make an example of her. But she'd also meant what she said about corporate social responsibility. The idea of transforming Meridian Capital into something that mattered, that actually helped people, rather than just accumulating wealth, felt right in a way nothing else in her professional life ever had. She called Ethan from her car, suddenly desperate to hear his voice. How'd it go? He answered immediately. I survived. Barely. They're investigating rather than firing me outright, which I'm counting as a win. Isabella leaned back against the leather seat. I also essentially committed to transforming my entire company's business model based on a rescue operation I coordinated with a mechanic I've known for 3 days. So that's either visionary leadership or a complete mental breakdown. Why not both? She could hear the smile in his voice. I'm proud of you. That took courage. Or stupidity. The difference between courage and stupidity is outcome. If it works, you're brave. If it fails, you're reckless. We won't know which until later. He paused. Are you okay? Really? I don't know. I keep waiting to feel something, relief or fear or triumph or anything definitive. But mostly I just feel different. Like I've become someone I don't quite recognize yet. Isabella watched Manhattan slide past her window. Is that normal after something like this? Completely normal. Combat changes people. Near-death experiences change people. Choosing to risk yourself for others changes people. You've done all 3 in less than a week. You'd be weird if you didn't feel different. His voice grew gentler. Give yourself time to adjust. Don't try to force it back to how things were, because things aren't how they were. You're not who you were. That's not bad. It's just true. Who was I before? The question surprised Isabella even as she asked it. I thought I knew, but now I'm not sure I ever really understood myself. Was I the ice queen who destroyed careers? The terrified girl watching her father lose everything? The woman building towers to hide from the world? Who was I really? Maybe all of those things, Ethan suggested. Maybe we're all composed of different versions of ourselves, and which one dominates depends on our choices and circumstances. You're choosing different now, so a different version of Isabella Sterling is emerging. I like this version better. She scares me, but I like her. Good. Fear means you're challenging yourself. Comfort means you're stagnating. He paused. Listen, I know you're probably exhausted and have a million things to deal with, but Lily's been asking about you nonstop. Something about showing you her butterfly collection and explaining transitive property again. If you're up for it, maybe you could come by the shop this afternoon. No pressure, just she'd really love to see you. And honestly, so would I. Isabella should have said no. Should have gone home to sleep or returned to the office to manage the fallout, or done any of the 1,000 responsible things a CEO should do after narrowly avoiding termination. Instead, she heard herself say, I'll be there in an hour. Tell Lily to prepare her best butterfly lecture. The drive to Red Hook felt different this time, less like descending from her tower into foreign territory, and more like going somewhere she belonged. Carter Restorations looked exactly the same as before, but Isabella saw it with new eyes. This wasn't just a garage. It was a home, a place where a man had built a life that mattered, where he raised his daughter with love and wisdom, where he restored broken things and made them beautiful again. She was starting to understand that she was one of those broken things, being carefully restored. Lily exploded out of the garage the moment Isabella's car pulled up, running at full speed with a shoebox clutched to her chest. Isabella, you came. I have so much to show you. Did you know there are over 17,000 species of butterflies? Well, probably you didn't because most adults don't know good butterfly facts. But I'm going to teach you, and then you'll be smart about butterflies too. That sounds perfect, Isabella said, catching Lily as the girl practically launched herself into her arms. I definitely need to be smarter about butterflies. Everyone does. Butterflies are very important and also beautiful, which is a good combination. Like you. You're important because you saved Anya, and you're beautiful because, well, you just are. Daddy says that's shallow to comment on, but I think noticing when people are pretty is just being observant, which is actually a valuable skill. Do you think I'm shallow? I think you're extraordinarily perceptive, Isabella replied, setting Lily down and letting the girl pull her toward the garage. And thank you. That's very kind. Ethan appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame with an expression that made Isabella's heart do something complicated. He was in his usual uniform of worn jeans and work shirt, grease smudged on his forearm, hair slightly mussed. He looked nothing like the men she typically associated with, the polished executives in expensive suits who measured their worth in stock options and corner offices. He looked real, solid, like someone who'd still be there when everything else fell apart. Fair warning, he said as they approached. Lily's been preparing this butterfly presentation for 2 hours. She has visual aids. And a quiz at the end. There's no quiz, Lily protested. That would be mean, but I might ask a few questions to make sure you were paying attention, which is totally different from a quiz because it's less formal. Isabella spent the next hour sitting on the garage floor while an 8-year-old girl showed her carefully preserved butterfly specimens and explained metamorphosis with the passionate intensity of a college professor. It was absurd and wonderful and completely unlike anything she'd ever experienced. Lily's enthusiasm was infectious, her knowledge impressive, her joy in sharing it absolutely pure. This one's my favorite, Lily said, showing Isabella a blue morpho butterfly. It's from South America, and the blue isn't actually pigment, it's structural coloration, which means the wings are designed in a way that reflects light to make them look blue. Isn't that amazing? They're not actually blue, they just make you think they are through clever architecture. That is amazing, Isabella agreed, studying the iridescent wings. So they're using structure rather than substance to create beauty. Exactly. Nature's really smart like that. Sometimes the best way to be something is to build yourself in a way that reflects it, rather than trying to actually be it. Lily considered this. I guess that's kind of a metaphor. Daddy says I accidentally make metaphors sometimes because I think about things weird. You think about things brilliantly, Isabella corrected, and that's an excellent metaphor. Building yourself to reflect what you want to become rather than expecting to already be it. See, I told you she was smart, Lily said to her father, who'd been listening from his workbench with barely suppressed amusement. Can we keep her? Lily, Ethan said, his voice carrying gentle reproach even as he smiled. People aren't butterflies. We can't just collect them. But we can be friends with them, right? Isabella can be our friend. Lily turned pleading eyes on Isabella. You want to be our friend, right? We're good friends. We make really good mac and cheese, and Daddy tells excellent bedtime stories. And I promise not to talk too much, even though I probably will talk too much because that's who I am. Isabella felt something in her chest crack wide open. Not breaking, but opening, like a door she'd kept locked suddenly swinging free. This child, this precious, brilliant, talkative little girl, was asking her to be part of their life with such genuine hope that refusing felt impossible. I would love to be your friend, Isabella said, and meant it more than she'd meant almost anything. Though I should warn you that I don't know much about mac and cheese, my cooking skills are limited to ordering takeout. That's okay. We can teach you. Right, Daddy? We can teach Isabella how to make proper mac and cheese, and then she'll be part of our family traditions, which means she's basically family. Which means she has to come to my birthday party in 3 weeks, which has a butterfly theme because, obviously. Lily was bouncing with excitement. This is the best day ever. I got a new friend who's pretty and smart and saved a little girl and doesn't mind that I talk too much. I love that you talk too much, Isabella said honestly. You say interesting things. That's rare. Lily beamed, then announced she needed to go find her other butterfly books to show Isabella more species. She disappeared into the office, leaving Isabella alone with Ethan in the garage. Sorry about the friend collection attempt, Ethan said, moving to sit beside Isabella on the floor. Lily's not subtle about wanting people to stick around. She's perfect. Both of you are. Isabella leaned against him slightly, exhaustion finally catching up to her. This is nice, sitting on a garage floor talking about butterflies. I can't remember the last time I did something just because it made me happy rather than because it advanced some goal or project. Welcome to actual living. It's messier than your tower, but significantly more rewarding. Ethan's arm went around her shoulders naturally, like they'd been doing this for years rather than days. You did good today. The board meeting, standing up for what you believe in. I'm proud of you. I threatened them with public relations disaster and weaponized a child's rescue into corporate strategy. That's not exactly noble. You transformed a terrible situation into an opportunity to do genuine good. You're planning to use your company's resources to fight human trafficking and organized crime. That's absolutely noble, regardless of the tactics you use to make it happen. He squeezed her shoulder gently. Don't diminish what you're doing, Isabella. You're choosing to matter. That takes courage. I'm terrified, she admitted quietly, of the legal consequences, of failing, of letting down people who are counting on me, of this, she gestured between them, whatever this is that's developing between us. I'm terrified of all of it. Good. If you weren't scared, it would mean you didn't understand the stakes. Ethan turned slightly so he could see her face. But fear doesn't mean you stop. It means you acknowledge the risk and choose to move forward anyway. That's what courage actually is. Is that what you did? When your wife was sick? Just acknowledge the fear and move forward? Ethan was quiet for a moment. I tried. Didn't always succeed. There were days I wanted to run, to hide, to pretend it wasn't happening. But Sarah needed me. Lily needed me. So I stayed present, even when it was excruciating, even when watching her fade was the hardest thing I'd ever done. His voice roughened slightly. Losing her taught me that everything ends, every good thing, every relationship, every moment of happiness. It all ends eventually. So the question becomes, do you avoid connection to avoid loss? Or do you embrace what you can have for as long as you can have it, and accept that the pain of losing it is the price of having it at all? That's a terrible cost-benefit analysis, Isabella said, but she was smiling through unexpected tears. The pain of loss should logically outweigh the temporary joy of connection. Except it doesn't. Not when the connection is real. I'd go through losing Sarah again, experience every agonizing moment of that grief, if it meant I got to have our years together. Worth it, every time. He brushed a tear from Isabella's cheek with his thumb. You're worth it too. Whatever this is developing between us, whatever risks it carries, I think it's worth it. But that's my assessment. You have to make your own. Isabella looked up at him, this mechanic who'd saved her life, who'd shown her what actual courage looked like, who'd made her want to be someone worth knowing. And she made a choice that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. She kissed him. It wasn't dramatic or particularly graceful, just a simple press of her lips to his, a question and an answer and a declaration all at once. Ethan responded immediately, his hand cradling her face, deepening the kiss with surprising gentleness. He tasted like coffee and possibility, and Isabella felt something in her chest expand painfully, wonderfully, like learning to breathe for the first time. When they finally broke apart, Ethan was smiling. Well, that was unexpected. Was it? Isabella felt her face flush. I've been wanting to do that since the hospital. Me too, but I was trying to be respectful, not take advantage of trauma bonding or proximity or... He stopped as Isabella kissed him again, briefer this time, but no less certain. I'm making my own assessment, she said firmly. And my assessment is that this is absolutely worth it. The risk, the potential pain, all of it. You're worth it. I found more butterfly books. Lily's voice announced her return approximately 3 seconds before she appeared in the doorway. She stopped, looked at her father and Isabella sitting very close together on the garage floor, and her face split into a grin that could probably be seen from space. Were you kissing? You were totally kissing. That's amazing. Does this mean Isabella is going to be my bonus mom? Because I would really like a bonus mom, and she's so pretty and smart, and she likes butterflies even though she didn't know much about them before, which means she's willing to learn new things, which is an excellent quality in a bonus mom. Lily, Ethan said, his tone carrying warning even as he tried not to laugh. Slow down. Isabella and I are friends who maybe like each other as more than friends. That doesn't automatically mean... It means you're dating. Dating is when adults decide they like each other enough to kiss and spend time together. I learned about it from the movie we watched last week, the one with the princess who fell in love with the person who saved her from the tower. That's basically your story, except with fire extinguishers instead of magic. Lily plopped down on the floor next to them. I approve of this development, just so you know. You have my blessing to date my dad, Isabella. He's really great once you get used to his weird habits, like always sitting facing doors and checking locks 17 times before bed. Those are very normal habits for someone with my background, Ethan protested. They're trauma responses, Lily said matter-of-factly. We learned about them in grief counseling after Mom died. It's okay to have them. Isabella probably has some too now, after getting held hostage. Maybe you can have trauma responses together, which sounds romantic in a weird way. Isabella found herself laughing, genuine, surprised laughter that came from somewhere deep and unguarded. You're absolutely right. We probably will have trauma responses together. That does sound romantic in a weird way. See? I'm very wise for 8. Daddy says I'm an old soul, which I think means I think about things too much, but he means it as a compliment, so I'm taking it as one. Lily settled in comfortably. So when are you going to move in? Because dating usually leads to living together, and then you'd be here all the time, and we could teach you about butterflies and engines and how to make proper pancakes. Daddy makes really good pancakes. It's his superpower. Lily Carter, Ethan said, his voice firm now. You're getting way ahead of things. Isabella has her own apartment, her own life. She's not going to just move in. Why not? She doesn't like her apartment. I can tell. It's too white and cold and high up. She said her tower was lonely, which means she wants to come down from it. We have space. Well, not a lot of space, but we could make space. I could share my room if necessary, though I'd prefer to keep my own room because I need space for my collections. Isabella looked at this child who'd essentially just proposed that they become a family and felt something shift fundamentally in her understanding of what she wanted. Not the penthouse with its pristine isolation, not the office with its view of a city she'd never really belonged to. This garage with its butterfly books and grease stains and 8-year-old wisdom. This man who'd shown her what courage actually meant. This accidental family forming around shared trauma and genuine connection. I'm not moving in tomorrow, she said carefully, wanting to be honest with Lily, but I would like to spend more time here, getting to know you both better, learning about butterflies and pancakes and whatever else you want to teach me. Would that be okay? That would be perfect, Lily declared. We can do a trial period. That's what Daddy calls it when he's deciding whether to take on a new restoration project. We try it out, see if it works, and if it does, we commit fully. You're our trial period girlfriend, bonus mom friend, and I predict you'll pass the trial with flying colors because you're already excellent. Lily, Ethan said, but he was smiling now. Why don't you go start on your homework? Isabella and I need to have a grown-up conversation. Is it about feelings? Because I can help with feelings. I'm very emotionally intelligent. You are. But this is still a private conversation. Homework. Now. And I'll check it, so do it properly. Lily sighed dramatically but departed, leaving them alone again. Ethan turned to Isabella with an apologetic expression. I'm sorry. She's enthusiastic and has no boundaries and apparently thinks she can just decide we're a family. Don't apologize. Isabella caught his hand. She's right about most of it. I don't like my apartment. My tower is lonely, and I do want to come down from it, metaphorically and literally. I want to spend time here, with you, with her, learning how to be part of something instead of always being apart from everything. Isabella, Ethan said carefully, this is fast, really fast. A week ago, we didn't know each other existed. Now you're talking about changing your entire life. I know, it's insane. By any logical analysis, this is reckless and premature and probably going to end badly. She squeezed his hand. But logic hasn't served me particularly well. Logic gave me an empire and left me completely alone. So maybe it's time to try something illogical, something terrifying, something that might actually make me happy instead of just successful. Ethan studied her for a long moment, those storm-gray eyes seeing past all her defenses to whatever truth lay underneath. Okay, but we do this right. We take time. We let it develop naturally. No pressure, no expectations, just seeing what happens. Can you handle that level of uncertainty? Absolutely not. I'm going to hate every second of not having a clear plan or guaranteed outcome. Isabella smiled, but I'm going to do it anyway. Because you and Lily are worth being uncomfortable for. That might be the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me, which says concerning things about my previous relationships. Ethan pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. Fair warning, I come with complications. A daughter who will absolutely test every boundary you have. Trauma from years of combat that sometimes wakes me up at 3 in the morning. A business that barely pays the bills, no corner office, no stock options, no impressive anything except a stubborn commitment to fixing things. I come with complications too. A board that wants me fired, potential federal charges for financial crimes, a lifetime of emotional repression that I'm just starting to unpack, an empire that's probably going to implode while I figure out how to be human again. Isabella smiled. We're both disasters. Maybe we can be disasters together. That's the worst sales pitch for a relationship I've ever heard. Good thing I'm not selling, I'm offering. Take it or leave it. Ethan kissed her, longer this time, deeper, with the kind of certainty that came from choosing something despite understanding the risks. When they finally broke apart, Isabella felt like she'd just jumped off a very tall building and discovered she could fly. Over the next 3 months, Isabella's life transformed in ways that would have been unimaginable before the cafe shooting. The legal consequences of her financial crimes never materialized. Turned out that when you use illegal methods to rescue kidnapped children and help police dismantle criminal networks, prosecutors were reluctant to prosecute. Detective Morrison even sent her a bottle of expensive whiskey with a note that said, "Don't do it again, but thank you." The board investigation concluded that while her methods were unorthodox, the results demonstrated innovative thinking and commitment to corporate social responsibility. Meridian Capital established a new forensic investigation division dedicated to assisting law enforcement in tracking criminal financial networks. It was profitable. Criminals always left money trails, and it mattered, which made coming to work feel like purpose rather than just obligation. Richard Brennan resigned from the board after someone, Isabella had her suspicions but no proof, leaked documents suggesting his continued ties to the money laundering networks she'd exposed. His departure removed her primary opposition and gave her the freedom to actually transform the company. But the biggest changes happened away from Meridian Capital's towers. Isabella didn't move in with Ethan and Lily, not immediately, but she started spending more time in Red Hook than in her Tribeca penthouse. Started learning how to make pancakes and macaroni and cheese, started attending Lily's school events and helping with homework, started understanding that family wasn't about dramatic declarations or legal documents. It was about showing up consistently, caring genuinely, choosing to be present even when it was inconvenient or uncomfortable. Lily's trial period assessment, delivered with characteristic seriousness 6 weeks in, was, "You pass. You're officially our person now. We're keeping you." Isabella cried when she heard that, actual tears which Lily found fascinating and slightly alarming until Isabella explained they were happy tears, which led to a lengthy discussion about emotional complexity that somehow circled back to butterflies and metamorphosis. Natasha and Anya had coffee with Isabella once a month, a tradition that started with gratitude and evolved into genuine friendship. Watching Anya heal from her trauma, seeing her smile return and her mother's fear gradually recede, reminded Isabella why she'd chosen to help in the first place. Some things were worth every risk. The media coverage of the CEO vigilante eventually died down, replaced by other scandals and stories, but it had lasting impact. Suddenly, Isabella Sterling wasn't just the Ice Queen of Wall Street, she was someone who'd actually done something meaningful. Her social media presence exploded with people inspired by her transformation. She received hundreds of letters from people facing impossible situations, asking for help she couldn't always provide, but tried to offer anyway. She hired Bear, Hawk, and Doc as security consultants for Meridian Capital's new forensics division. Turned out that translating military tactical expertise into corporate security strategy was surprisingly lucrative and significantly more ethical than some of their previous post-military work. They became a strange but effective addition to her company, bringing skills and perspectives that transformed how they approached problems. Sarah called every week to mock her gently about the matchmaking disaster that had somehow resulted in the best thing that ever happened to both of them. "I'm taking full credit," she'd say. "I brought you two together. That you nearly died in the process is just details." And Ethan. Ethan became her foundation in ways that terrified and steadied her simultaneously. He didn't fix her. She was learning that people didn't need fixing, just accepting. But he made her feel safe enough to keep changing, to keep choosing courage over comfort, to keep building a life that actually meant something. On a Saturday morning in March, 6 months after the cafe shooting, Isabella woke up in Ethan's apartment. Not her sterile penthouse, but the lived-in, messy, wonderfully chaotic space above the garage. She could hear Lily singing off-key in the kitchen while Ethan made his famous pancakes. She could smell coffee and butter and the particular scent of motor oil that permeated everything in this place. She got up and joined them, wearing one of Ethan's old army t-shirts and sleep pants, her hair a mess, no makeup, completely unlike the polished CEO who used to armor herself in designer suits before facing the world. "Morning," Ethan said, flipping a pancake with professional efficiency. "Sleep okay?" "Better than I ever did in my tower." Isabella poured herself coffee, then kissed him briefly, casual domesticity that still felt revolutionary. What's the plan today? Lily has a birthday party at noon, Ethan said. Then I need to finish the carburetor rebuild on the '69 Camaro. What about you? Office work? Actually, I was thinking about canceling my Tribeca lease. Isabella said it casually, but her heart was pounding. Seems silly to keep paying for an apartment I never use. Lily's head whipped around. Does that mean you're moving in? Like officially moving in? Because I have opinions about how we should rearrange your stuff and where we can put your butterfly collection. Oh wait, you don't have a butterfly collection yet, but we can fix that. And this is so exciting I might explode. Lily, breathe, Ethan said automatically. Then he looked at Isabella with an expression that mixed surprise and joy and something deeper. You're serious? Terrifyingly serious. My lease is up next month, and I've been thinking that keeping it is just maintaining an escape route. A way to run if this gets too scary or too real or too anything. Isabella set down her coffee. But I don't want an escape route. I want this. You two. Pancakes on Saturday mornings and homework help and motorcycle parts in the living room. I want messy and real and terrifying instead of perfect and isolated and safe. That's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard, Lily declared. You should write greeting cards. I want messy and real and terrifying with you as an excellent relationship motto. Can that be our family motto? Can we get it embroidered on something? We are not embroidering that on anything, Ethan said, but he was moving toward Isabella, pulling her into his arms with the kind of certainty that came from knowing exactly what he wanted. Are you sure? Because moving in is big. There's no trial period after this. This is commitment. I know, I'm sure. Isabella looked up at him. 3 days after I met you, I risked everything to help a stranger. I committed felonies, defied my board, participated in a hostage rescue despite having no relevant skills. If I could do all that based on instinct and courage, I can certainly commit to living with the man I love and his incredible daughter. You love him? Lily's squeal was probably audible in Connecticut. You said it! You love him. That's stage 5 in relationship development, which I learned about from extensive research, which means you're committed and we're officially a family and this is the best day of my entire life. I love him, Isabella confirmed, keeping her eyes on Ethan. I love both of you. More than I knew I could love anything. More than money or success or safety. You saved me. Not just from those gunmen, but from the tower I'd built around myself. You showed me what actually matters. And I want to build a life that reflects that understanding. Ethan kissed her thoroughly, unconcerned that his daughter was watching and providing running commentary about proper technique and whether this qualified as a movie-worthy kiss. When they finally broke apart, there were tears on his face. I love you too, he said simply. Both of us do. Welcome home, Isabella. Home. The word had never meant anything to Isabella before, just an address, a piece of real estate, a place to sleep between work obligations. But looking around this small apartment above a garage in Red Hook, with its mismatched furniture and Lily's butterfly drawings and the lingering smell of pancakes, she finally understood what home actually was. It wasn't a place. It wasn't a tower or a penthouse or a carefully curated space designed to impress. Home was people who saw you completely and loved you anyway. Home was choosing to show up, to be vulnerable, to risk your heart on the impossible chance that connection was worth any cost. Home was here. So, Lily said, already pulling out a notebook covered in stickers, we need to make a moving plan. You have a lot of stuff in that apartment, and we need to figure out what to keep, what to donate, and what to burn ceremonially to mark your transformation from Ice Queen to regular person who lives in a garage apartment with us. I vote we burn at least 3 expensive designer things. It'll be symbolic. We're not burning anything, Ethan said firmly. Fine, but we're definitely donating some of those white furniture pieces because they look uncomfortable and also kind of sad. Furniture shouldn't look sad. Furniture should look friendly and welcoming. Isabella listened to them debate her furniture's emotional state and felt something she'd been missing her entire adult life. Joy. Simple, uncomplicated joy at being part of something bigger than herself. At being chosen and choosing in return. At trading her tower for a garage apartment and somehow gaining everything that actually mattered. Her phone buzzed. Marcus, with the daily crisis report. But instead of immediately responding, Isabella silenced it. The crisis could wait. Meridian Capital could wait. The empire she'd built could function without her constant attention for one morning. Right now, she had more important things to do, like eating pancakes with her family, like helping Lily plan a ceremonial donation of sad furniture, like kissing Ethan Carter and feeling grateful for armed gunmen who'd shattered her world so completely that she'd been forced to rebuild it into something actually worth living. Years later, when people asked Isabella Sterling about her transformation from Wall Street's ice queen to someone who actually seemed happy, she'd think about that morning, about pancakes and butterfly lectures, and the moment she chose messy reality over perfect isolation. She'd think about a cafe shooting that should have broken her but instead became the catalyst for everything good in her life. About a mechanic who'd seen past her armor to the terrified woman underneath and decided she was worth saving. About an 8-year-old girl who'd declared them family and refused to accept any other reality. She'd think about towers and walls and all the ways people imprisoned themselves in pursuit of safety, never realizing that the only real security came from connection, from being brave enough to let people in despite knowing they could hurt you. And she'd smile, genuine, unguarded, the smile of someone who'd finally learned that falling wasn't failure. Falling was just the first step toward learning how to fly. The mechanic, the CEO, and the moment that changed everything. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was better. It was real.